They say blood is sacred, but for 23 years, mine was slow poison. Instead of accepting my degree as valedictorian, I lay dying on an operating table with a 30% chance of survival. My parents were on a Caribbean yacht, celebrating my brother's fake success. They only rushed back to ensure my heart beat long enough to sign away millions I didn't know I owned. Sometimes the worst storm is right in your own living room. My name is Dahlia Lockhart, and 4 weeks before I was scheduled to walk across the stage and accept my diploma, I was living on a diet of instant coffee, stale bagels, and the adrenaline of sheer panic to the outside world, or at least to the polished LinkedIn profile I was desperately trying to build. I was a success story in motion. I was the top student in the economic law department, the star intern at Vanguard Horizon who never missed a deadline, and a young woman with a bright future. In reality, I was a machine running on fumes, grinding my gears against a life that seemed designed to crush me. My day started at 4 a.m. I would wake up in my 300-square-foot apartment in the bad part of town, where the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor coughing his lungs out and the radiator hissed like a dying snake. I would study for 2 hours before the sun came up, reviewing case laws and economic theories until the words swam before my eyes. Then came the first shift at Vanguard Horizon, where I fetched coffee and drafted memos for junior partners who made more in a month than I would see in a year. After that, classes until 5 p.m, and finally, the night shift at the Rustic Tap, a dive bar where the floor was permanently sticky with spilled beer and the tips were barely enough to cover my electricity bill. I was 23 years old, and I felt like I was 80. The contrast between my life and the rest of my family was not just a gap, it was a canyon, while I was taping my shoes together because the soles were flapping. My brother, Julian, was living in a penthouse downtown that my parents rented for him. Julian was 26 years old, 3 years my senior, and a self-proclaimed serial entrepreneur in the Lockhart family dictionary. Entrepreneur was a synonym for unemployed with an allowance. He drove a bright red sports car that cost more than my entire college education, and his Instagram feed was a montage of champagne bottles, poolside parties, and vague captions about the grind and the hustle. The irony was suffocating. I was actually grinding. He was just spending. It was a Tuesday when the latest financial crisis hit. Though not for me. I had stopped by my parents' house, a pristine suburban fortress with manicured lawns and white pillars, because I needed a signature for my student loan paperwork. There had been a bureaucratic hiccup with the financial aid office, a clerical error that threatened to delay my final semester clearance unless a parent guarantor signed off on a modification. It was a formality, nothing that would cost them a dime, just a scratch of ink on paper. As I walked into the living room, the air conditioning hit me like a wall of ice. It smelled of expensive potpourri and lemon polish, a stark difference from the scent of stale beer and exhaust fumes that clung to my clothes. My mother, Cynthia, was sitting on the beige velvet sofa, weeping delicately into a silk handkerchief. My father, Robert, was pacing the room, looking grave. Julian was there too, sprawled on the armchair, looking like a misunderstood genius who had just been burdened with a great vision. "It is a game changer, Dad," Julian was saying, gesturing with a crystal tumbler of scotch. "This app is going to revolutionize the way people connect with their pets. It is the Facebook for hamsters, but I need the capital to push the marketing before the quarter ends. If we miss this window, the market share is gone." "How much?" my father asked, his voice trembling with a mix of anxiety and pride. $50,000, Julian said. He said it casually, as if he were asking for $20 for pizza. "That covers the initial ad spend and the influencer outreach program." I froze in the doorway, clutching my backpack straps. $50,000. That was nearly 2 years of my tuition. That was enough to pay off the debts that kept me awake at 3 a.m. My father did not hesitate. He walked over to the antique writing desk and pulled out his checkbook. "We will have to dip into the retirement savings again, Cynthia," he said to my mother. "But we cannot let Julian's brilliance go to waste. This is an investment, a seed for the future." Of course, Robert, my mother sniffed, wiping her eyes. Our boy is going to change the world. We have to support him. I watched, feeling a cold numbness spread through my chest, as my father wrote a check for $50,000 and handed it to my brother. Julian took it with a smirk that he tried to hide behind a mask of solemn gratitude. Thanks, Dad. You won't regret this. I will pay you back tenfold by next year. It was only after the check was tucked into Julian's designer jacket that they noticed me standing there. The warmth in the room evaporated instantly. Dahlia, my mother said, her voice sharpening. What are you doing here? We are having a family crisis. I needed a signature, I said, my voice sounding raspy. For the loan paperwork, the bank needs to verify the guarantor status again. My mother sighed, a long, exasperated sound that filled the room. Always something with you, isn't there? Money, paperwork, problems. Can't you see we are dealing with important matters? Your brother is launching a business. I just need a signature, Mom. It takes 5 seconds. You are so calculating, she spat, standing up and smoothing her skirt. So selfish. You come in here, demanding things, while we are trying to secure your brother's future. You have always been like this, cold, detached. She signed the paper eventually, scribbling her name with aggressive strokes, practically tearing the paper. She shoved it back at me as if it were contaminated. There, now go. We have to celebrate Julian's funding. I turned to leave, but before I could escape, my mother's eyes landed on my outfit. I was wearing my work clothes for the internship, a navy blue dress I had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. It was faded at the seams and slightly too loose in the waist. But it was professional enough. Is that what you are wearing to the graduation? She asked, her nose wrinkling. I was planning to, I stammered. I cannot afford a new gown right now. The internship does not pay much, and with the rent hike. Oh, stop the Poverty Act, she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. It is embarrassing. You look like a maid. If you are going to wear that rag in the family photos, do me a favor and stand at the edge, far away from me and Julian. I do not want you ruining the aesthetic. We have an image to maintain. I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodding silently. Okay, Mom, I will stand at the edge. I walked out of the living room, heading towards the kitchen to get a glass of water before the long bus ride back to the city. As I passed my father's study, the door was slightly ajar. I heard his low, urgent voice. Yes, I know the date. Arthur, I know. The trust matures in 4 weeks, exactly on her 23rd birthday. No, she does not know. Nobody knows. Look, if she gains access to that kind of capital now, with her attitude, we need to figure out a contingency. Is there a clause for incapacity? Or hang on. I had stepped on a creaky floorboard. My father spun around, his face draining of color. He slammed the phone down onto the receiver so hard it rattled the desk. Dahlia, he barked, his eyes darting nervously. How long have you been standing there? I just walked by, I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. Who were you talking to? Nobody, he said quickly, forcing a tight, fake smile. Just business, boring legal matters. You would not understand. You should get going. You do not want to be late for your waitressing job, or whatever it is you do. I left the house with the taste of ash in my mouth. A trust fund? Maturing on my birthday? It made no sense. We were not poor, clearly, given the check my father had just written, but we were not trust fund rich, unless there was money I did not know about, money that my father seemed terrified of me finding. That was when the headaches started to get worse. I had been having them for months, sharp, stabbing pains behind my left eye that made the world blur for a few seconds. I attributed it to the lack of sleep and the constant glare of computer screens. But that night, on the bus ride back to my apartment, the pain shifted. It wasn't just a headache anymore. It felt like a hot wire being tightened around my brain. My left hand, clutching the strap of the bus overhead rail, went numb. It started at the fingertips, a prickling sensation like 1,000 ants marching under my skin, and crept up to my elbow. I dropped my bag. "Miss, you okay?" a passenger asked. "I'm fine," I whispered, rubbing my arm until the feeling returned. "Just tired, just stress." I told myself it was nothing. I was 23. I was healthy. I just needed to get through the next 4 weeks. Once I graduated, once I got a real job at a law firm, I could sleep, I could see a doctor. I just had to push through. 2 nights later, I was working the late shift at the Rustic Tap. The bar was crowded, loud, and smelled of stale hops and desperation. I was wiping down the counter, trying to ignore the throbbing in my temples, when the door opened and a gust of cool night air blew in. Standing there, looking completely out of place in his tweed jacket and flat cap, was my grandfather, Silas. He was my father's father. But the 2 men could not have been more different. Silas was a mechanic, a veteran who had grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands. He didn't care about social climbing or appearances. He was the only person in my family who had ever looked at me and seen a human being. Not an investment or a nuisance. He walked up to the bar, leaning his cane against the wood. "Hello, kiddo." "Grandpa," I said, a genuine smile breaking through my exhaustion. "What are you doing here? It is 1 a.m. "Couldn't sleep," he grunted, "and I hate the quiet. Besides, I wanted to see the best bartender in the city." I poured him a glass of water, knowing he didn't drink anymore. He watched me work for a while, his sharp blue eyes taking in the dark circles under my eyes, the tremor in my hands as I poured drinks, the way I flinched when the music got too loud. "You are burning the candle at both ends, Dahlia," he said softly, "and the middle is melting too. I have to... Grandpa, almost there. 4 more weeks." He reached into the pocket of his worn jacket and pulled out a thick, white envelope. It was battered and stained with a little bit of oil. He slid it across the sticky counter, covering it with his calloused hand. "Take it," he said. "What is this?" "Money. Cash. I have been squirreling it away from the pension. Selling some old parts. It is not a fortune, maybe $2,000. But it is yours." "Grandpa." "I can't." I started to push it back. "You need this for your heart medication, for your heating bill." "I have enough," he insisted, his voice firm. He grabbed my hand and pressed the envelope into my palm. His grip was strong, surprising for a man of 80. "Listen to me, Dahlia. I see what they are doing to you. Robert and Cynthia are blind. They look at that brother of yours and see a king, and they look at you and see a servant. But you are the one with the fire." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper amidst the noise of the bar. "You keep this money hidden. Do not put it in the bank account your father has access to. Keep it cash. You are going to need it to get away from them, to break out of this cage they have built around you. They will drain you dry if you let them. Dahlia, they will eat your soul to feed that boy's ego." I looked down at the envelope, tears pricking my eyes. $2,000. It wasn't $50,000. It wasn't an investment in a genius. It was blood and sweat and sacrifice from an old man who loved me. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered. "Don't thank me," he said, tapping his cane on the floor. "Just survive. You promise me? You survive this." I nodded, clutching the envelope to my chest. "I promise." But as he walked out into the night, a sudden wave of dizziness hit me so hard I had to grab the beer taps to keep from falling. The ants were back in my arm, marching all the way to my shoulder this time. My vision tunneled, the lights of the bar stretching into long, blurry streaks. I blinked, breathing hard, waiting for the world to stabilize. It was just stress. I told myself again, just stress. I had no idea that inside my skull, a ticking time bomb was counting down the seconds, and the family I was killing myself to please was already holding the detonator. 2 weeks before the date that was supposed to define my future, the letter arrived. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock, with the university seal embossed in gold leaf that shimmered under the flickering fluorescent bulb of my kitchen. I held it with trembling hands, not out of fear, but out of a desperate, childish hope that I had not yet managed to kill. The dean of the law school had signed it personally. I was not just graduating, I was the valedictorian. I had been selected to deliver the commencement address to a crowd of 5,000 people, including state senators, federal judges, and the captains of industry I hoped to one day prosecute. For a brief, delusional moment, I allowed myself to believe that this would be the thing. This would be the undeniable proof that would finally force Robert and Cynthia Lockhart to look at me and see something other than a background character in the Julian show. I imagined my father's chest puffing out with genuine pride, not the performative kind he saved for country club dinners. I imagined my mother tearing up, not because the lighting was flattering, but because her daughter had conquered a mountain. I should have known better. Hope is a dangerous thing when you are the scapegoat of a narcissist's narrative. I brought the letter to our weekly mandatory family dinner that Sunday. My parents insisted on these dinners to maintain the facade of a close-knit unit, though usually, it was just an audience for Julian's latest delusions of grandeur. I waited for a lull in the conversation, clutching the envelope under the table like a shield. "I have some news," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. I placed the letter on the table, right next to the untouched centerpiece of wax fruit. "I am the valedictorian. The university wants me to give the speech." My mother paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. She looked at the letter, then at me. "That is nice. Dahlia, very diligent of you." "Diligent?" I felt a crack in my chest. "Mom, it is the highest honor in the program. I am top of the class." "We know you study hard, sweetie," my father added, reaching for the wine bottle. "You have always been a bookworm. It suits you." That was it. No toast, no exclamation, just a pat on the head for the good little worker bee. Before I could push for the recognition I was starving for, Julian's phone pinged with a loud, obnoxious chime. He looked at the screen, and his eyes went wide. He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "No way," he shouted, a grin splitting his face. "You guys are not going to believe this. I just got the invite." "The invite to what, son?" My father's attention snapped to Julian instantly. The way a compass needle finds north. My gold-embossed letter was already forgotten, buried under the excitement of a push notification. "The Caribbean Apex Summit," Julian announced, holding his phone up like a trophy. "It is the most exclusive networking event of the year. Investors, tech moguls, crypto kings, it is happening on the Obsidian, that mega yacht everyone is talking about, and they want me there. They accepted my application." My mother gasped, clapping her hands together. "Oh, Julian, that is incredible! A yacht in the Caribbean? You are going to be rubbing shoulders with billionaires." "It is a huge opportunity," Julian said, leaning back with a smug satisfaction. "The only problem is the dates. It is in 2 weeks. The main networking gala is on the 21st. The 21st. The air left my lungs. "Julian," I said, my voice turning icy, "the 21st is my graduation." The table went silent, not the silence of realization, but the silence of inconvenience. My parents exchanged a look, a quick, telepathic communication of priorities that I had seen 1,000 times before. "Well," my father started, clearing his throat, "that is an unfortunate conflict." "It is not a conflict," I said, gripping the edge of the table. "It is my graduation. I am giving the speech. You have to be there." My mother sighed, the same long, suffering sigh she used when a waiter brought her the wrong vintage of wine. "Dahlia, honey, look at the bigger picture. A graduation ceremony is just pomp and circumstance. It is a long, boring day of sitting in the sun, listening to names being read out. But this is Julian's future. My future is happening on that stage," I argued, my voice rising. "I worked 4 years for this. I worked 3 jobs for this." And you did a great job, my father said soothingly, as if calming a hysterical child. But think about what this means for the family. If Julian secures funding on that yacht, if he makes the right connections, it changes everything. We are talking about generational wealth. Dahlia, we have to support him. We need to be there to help him network, to present a united front of success. You are going to skip my graduation to go on a boat ride? I asked, looking from one face to another, searching for a shred of guilt. I found none. It is not just a boat ride. Julian scoffed. God, you are so small-minded. This is business. This is the big leagues. Sorry if your little school play clashes with the real world. It is settled then, my father declared, wiping his mouth with a napkin. We will fly out to the Caribbean on the 19th. We will celebrate your graduation when we get back. Dahlia, we can go to that Italian place you like, the one with the breadsticks. I stood up, my chair scraping violently against the floor. I do not want breadsticks. I want my parents to see me accomplish something real for once. You are being incredibly selfish, my mother snapped, her veneer of sweetness dropping. Always making it about you. Your brother needs us right now. You? You have always been fine. You are the independent one. You do not need us holding your hand. You do not need us. The sentence hung in the air, a verdict they had passed on me when I was 6 years old and learned to tie my shoes because no one else would teach me. They had weaponized my survival instinct, using my resilience as an excuse for their neglect. I walked out of that house shaking, but the true depth of their betrayal did not hit me until 3 days later. I was at the pharmacy near the Vanguard Horizon offices, trying to pick up a refill for the strong painkillers I had been taking to manage the headaches that were now blinding me on a daily basis. I handed the pharmacist my insurance card, the family plan card that my father kept me on because it was cheaper than buying an individual policy, and he liked to claim it on his taxes. The pharmacist, a kind woman with gray curls, frowned at her computer screen. She typed something, waited, and then typed again. I am sorry, Miss Lockhart, she said. This card is being declined. The system says the coverage was terminated effective the 1st of the month. That is impossible, I said, pressing my fingers against my throbbing temple. My father pays the premium annually. It is a family package. It says here the dependent coverage was voluntarily dropped to adjust the premium tier, she explained gently. Would you like to pay out of pocket? It is $120. I paid it. I used the grocery money I had set aside for the week. My hands shaking so hard, I almost dropped the credit card. I stormed into my father's office the next morning, bypassing his secretary. He looked up, startled, trying to hide a travel itinerary he was reviewing. You cut my insurance, I said. It wasn't a question. He had the grace to look momentarily embarrassed, but he quickly recovered, putting on his business face. Dahlia, do not barge in here like this. We had to make some budget adjustments. Adjustments? You left me without medical coverage? I am sick. Dad, I have been having these headaches. Oh, please, he waved his hand dismissively. You are young, you are healthy. You do not need a premium gold-plated health plan. We needed to free up some liquidity. Liquidity for what? I snatched the itinerary from his desk before he could stop me. It was a receipt for the flights to the Caribbean. 3 tickets, not economy, not even business class. They were first-class suites on Emirates. The cost of the upgrade for the 3 of them was almost exactly the amount they would have saved by cutting my insurance for the year. You traded my health for legroom, I whispered, staring at the paper. You actually canceled my doctor access so you could drink champagne on the plane. It is a long flight, he defended, standing up to loom over me. We need to arrive fresh for the networking. Appearance is everything. Dahlia, you will understand that when you actually work in the real world. Besides, you can get student health insurance or something. Stop being so dramatic. I left his office without another word. There was nothing left to say. The cord was cut. They hadn't just chosen Julian over me. They had cannibalized my safety to feed their vanity. The physical toll of that realization was immediate. The stress was no longer just an emotional weight. It was a physiological toxin. 2 days later, I was in the university law library. The silence of the stacks usually a comfort to me. I was reviewing the final draft of my speech, trying to find words about future and hope that didn't taste like ash in my mouth. The headache hit me like a physical blow, a sudden, thunderous pressure behind my eyes that made me gasp. The library spun. I gripped the edge of the oak table, closing my eyes, waiting for it to pass. Drip. A drop of red hit the white paper of my speech. Drip. Drip. I touched my nose. My fingers came away slick with bright, crimson blood. It wasn't just a nosebleed. It was a torrent. I tilted my head back, grabbing a tissue, but the blood soaked through it in seconds. Panic flared in my chest. This wasn't normal. I should have gone to the emergency room right then. Any rational person would have. But the voice of my father echoed in my head. Stop being so dramatic. You are fine. And the reality of my bank account screamed louder. You have no insurance. 1 ER visit will bankrupt you before you even graduate. So I sat there, pinching the bridge of my nose until the bleeding stopped, cleaning the mess with trembling hands, and rewriting the blood-stained page of my speech. I told myself I would see a doctor after graduation, after I started my job, after I was safe. When I told Grandpa Silas about the Caribbean trip, I didn't tell him about the insurance. I didn't want to worry him. I just told him they weren't coming. We were in his small, cluttered living room, the smell of engine oil and old tea leaves hanging in the air. When I finished speaking, Silas didn't say a word. He stood up, his joints creaking, and picked up his favorite ceramic teacup, the one with the faded Navy insignia. He hurled it against the wall. The sound of shattering porcelain was shocking in the small room. Silas was a gentle man. I had never seen him break anything in anger. "Those damn fools," he growled, his voice shaking with a rage that seemed to vibrate through his thin frame. "Those absolute, blind fools. They are leaving you alone? On the biggest day of your life?" "It is okay, Grandpa," I lied, sweeping up the shards. "I am used to it. Julian needs the help." "Julian needs a kick in the teeth," Silas spat. "And your father Robert has lost his way. He has forgotten what it means to be a man. A man shows up. That is the first rule. You show up." He went to the rotary phone on the wall and dialed my father's number. I could hear him shouting, his voice rough and commanding, the voice of the sergeant he used to be. But after a minute, he slammed the receiver down. "They bought me a ticket," he said, turning to me, his eyes blazing. "They said they paid $2,000 for my seat, and I better get my old ass on the plane." "You should go, Grandpa," I said softly. "It is a nice vacation. The Caribbean is beautiful. I would rather rot in hell than step foot on a vacation paid for with your tears," he declared. "I told Robert to take that ticket and choke on it. I am not going anywhere. I am going to be right there in the front row. Dahlia, if they leave a gap, I will fill it. I will cheer loud enough for 10 people." He hugged me then, his flannel shirt smelling of comfort and safety, and for a moment, the pain in my head subsided. The night before they left, the night before my graduation, I was lying in the dark in my apartment, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from my mother. I picked it up, a foolish part of me hoping for a "good luck," or "we love you," or even "we will miss you." The screen glowed with her message. "Don't forget to email me a copy of your speech tonight. I want to read it over. Make sure you don't say anything stupid or overly emotional that would embarrass the family name. We have a reputation. Also, make sure your hair is flat-ironed. The humidity makes you look frizzy. No, I love you. No, I am proud. Just a demand for censorship and a critique of my hair." I put the phone down. I did not reply. The headache returned, pulsing in time with my heartbeat, a rhythmic drum of war. Thump, thump, thump. Tomorrow. I would stand on that stage. Tomorrow. I would speak my truth. But tonight, I lay in the dark, realizing that the orphanage of my childhood had not been a building, but a house with 2 parents and a brother who looked right through me. I closed my eyes, and the darkness behind my eyelids was red. 3 days before the ceremony that was supposed to mark the beginning of my new life, the lights in my apartment went out. It was not a storm, and it was not a blown fuse. It was a simple, brutal calculation I had made at the kitchen table 2 weeks prior. I had stared at my bank balance, then at the bill for the graduation gown and cap rental, and finally at the price of the prescription-strength painkillers I was buying off the books from a friend of a friend, because I could no longer walk into a pharmacy. I had enough money for 2 of those 3 things. I chose the gown and the pills. The electricity company, I decided, could wait. But living in the dark has a way of eroding your dignity. When the refrigerator hum died, and the silence of the unpowered apartment pressed in on my ears, the reality of my situation broke me. I packed a bag by the light of my phone screen, feeling like a refugee in my own life, and took the bus to the edge of town, to the small, clapboard house with the peeling paint where Grandpa Silas lived. His house was a museum of discarded things that had been loved back to life. The front yard was a graveyard of rusted engine parts, but inside, it smelled of pipe tobacco, motor oil, and peppermint tea. It was the only place in the world that smelled like safety. "The grid go down?" Silas asked when I walked in, not looking up from the toaster he was fixing at the kitchen table. "My grid did," I admitted, dropping my bag on the worn linoleum. I could not pay the bill. "Grandpa." He did not lecture me. He did not offer pity. He just stood up, his knees popping with a sound like dry twigs breaking, and pointed to the spare room. "The bed is made. The water heater is working. You are safe here. Dahlia." That first night, we sat on his back porch, watching the fireflies dance over the overgrown grass. The air was thick and humid, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned sterility of my parents' house. Silas cleared his throat, a sound that always preceded a story of importance. "You remind me of her. You know," he said softly, looking at the smoke curling from his pipe. "Your grandmother, Eleanor." I looked at him, surprised. My grandmother had died before I was born. My father rarely spoke of her, and when he did, it was with a dismissive wave, describing her as a quiet, simple woman. "Dad says she was just a housewife," I said. Silas laughed, a dry barking sound. "Robert says that because it is the only way he can live with himself. Eleanor was not simple. She was brilliant. She ran the books for this shop better than any accountant. She saved every penny we made. She bought land when everyone else was selling. But she was a woman in a time and a family that wanted her to be silent. Robert took after the side of the family that liked to spend. Not the side that liked to build. He drained her. Dahlia, emotionally, spiritually, just like they are trying to drain you." He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a small, polished wooden box. It was made of dark walnut, smooth from years of handling. There was no keyhole, just a complex mechanism of sliding panels on the top. "She gave this to me before she passed," Silas said, placing the box in my hands. It felt heavy, warm, and humming with a strange energy. "She told me to give it to the one who had her fire. I have been waiting 23 years to see who that would be. It is you, kid." "What is inside?" I asked, shaking it gently. Something shifted silently within. "I do not know," Silas admitted. "She never told me, and I never opened it. She said the lock is a puzzle. She said, 'Give it to the one who needs to know that freedom is a riddle you solve yourself. Do not open it yet. Dahlia, promise me, open it when you are free, truly free of them.'" I ran my thumb over the wood. "I promise." I put the box in my backpack, buried beneath my graduation gown. It felt like I was carrying a heartbeat. By the next morning, the sanctuary of Silas's house began to blur at the edges. The headache, which had been a constant companion, turned into a monster. It was no longer just pain. It was a distortion of reality. I would be standing in the kitchen, reaching for a mug, and suddenly my hand would disappear. a blind spot would expand in the center of my vision, a terrifying gray void that swallowed the world. I dropped a plate of toast. It shattered, and the noise sounded like a gunshot in my sensitive ears. I fell to my knees, retching dryly, my stomach convulsing with nothing to bring up but bile and fear. Silas was at my side in an instant. He touched my forehead, his rough hand trembling. "You are burning up, but your skin is cold. Dahlia, this is not stress. We are going to the hospital. Now." "No," I gasped, clutching the leg of the kitchen table. The world was spinning like a carousel out of control. "No hospital. I cannot afford it. I have no insurance." "I will pay," Silas insisted, grabbing his keys. "I will sell the truck. I do not care." "It is not just the money," I shouted, the effort making my head pound harder. "If I go to the hospital, they will admit me. They will run tests. They will keep me there for observation. I will miss the graduation. I will miss the speech." "Screw the speech," Silas yelled back, his face red. "You are dying in my kitchen." "I am not dying," I lied. I knew, deep down, that something was catastrophically wrong. I could feel the pressure building inside my skull, a dam waiting to burst. But the graduation was the only thing holding me together. It was the finish line. If I didn't cross it, everything I had suffered for, the hunger, the double shifts, the humiliation, would be for nothing. I just need to rest. I need to take the pills. Please, Grandpa, just get me to that stage. After that, you can take me anywhere you want. He looked at me, his eyes wet with helpless frustration. He saw the resolve in my face, the same stubbornness that had kept me alive in a house that didn't want me. Slowly, he lowered the keys. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. But you stay in bed. I will bring you soup. I will watch you." I spent the next 24 hours drifting in and out of a medicated haze. The pills dulled the sharpest edge of the pain, turning it into a heavy, dull thrumming that echoed the beat of my heart. Then, the phone rang. It was the evening before the ceremony. I was lying on Silas's old plaid couch, a cold compress over my eyes. My phone buzzed against my chest. I squinted at the screen. A video call request from Julian. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I didn't want to see them. I didn't want them to see me like this, weak and broken. But a masochistic part of me, the part that still craved their approval despite everything, made me accept. The screen exploded with light and noise. "Hey, can you hear me? The signal is trash out here in the middle of the ocean." Julian's face filled the frame. He was sunburnt, wearing mirrored sunglasses and a white linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest. Behind him, the turquoise water of the Caribbean stretched to the horizon, shimmering under a brutal, perfect sun. The contrast with the dim, yellow-lit living room where I lay was nauseating. "I can hear you," I croaked. "Look at this," Julian shouted, spinning the camera around. He was holding a lobster the size of a small dog. "Just caught this bad boy. We are having a seafood feast on the upper deck. The investors are loving me. Dahlia." I pitched the hamster app to a guy from Silicon Valley, and he didn't say no. He didn't say yes, either, I thought, but I stayed silent. The camera panned, and I saw my parents. They were lounging on white reclining chairs, holding drinks with little umbrellas. My mother was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses. My father was laughing at something a waiter was saying. They looked happy. They looked unburdened. They looked like people who had forgotten they had a daughter. "Hey, Mom! Dad!" Julian yelled. "Say hi to Dahlia." My mother waved lazily without looking up from her magazine. "Hi, sweetie. Hope you are not working too hard." "Robert, tell her about the snorkeling," Julian prodded. My father looked at the camera, his face flushed with alcohol and sun. "Incredible reefs. Dahlia, you should see the fish. Maybe next time, if you get a real job and can afford the ticket, you can come along." The cruelty was so casual it took my breath away. If I could afford the ticket, as if they hadn't stolen my safety net to buy their luxury. "Where are you, anyway?" Julian asked, peering at the screen. "That looks like Grandpa's dump." "I am staying with Silas," I said, my voice hardening. "My power went out." "Classic," Julian laughed. "Well, listen, I need a favor. Tomorrow is the big day, right? Since we cannot be there, make sure you get someone to record you receiving the diploma. Specifically the part where they call your name and say valedictorian. I want to post it on the company Instagram. It is great for the brand narrative. Genius sister of the founder, you know? Shows good genetics." My stomach turned over. He didn't want to see me graduate. He wanted content. He wanted to strip mine my achievement to fuel his fraud. "You want a video?" I asked, feeling the bile rise again. "Yeah, high definition if possible. And try to smile, okay? You always look so gloomy. It kills the vibe." "I have to go," I said. "Signal is bad. Wait, don't forget to—" I ended the call. The screen went black. Reflecting my own hollow face, I looked like a skull wrapped in parchment paper. I lay there for a long time, the silence of the house settling around me like a shroud. The pain in my head was building again, a rhythmic pounding that felt like someone was taking a sledgehammer to the base of my skull. I sat up and reached for my backpack. I pulled out the speech I had written, the one my mother had demanded to see, the one full of platitudes about support systems and the gratitude we owed to our families. "I stand here today thanks to the unwavering support of my loving parents." I read the first line and laughed. It was a dry, ragged sound that hurt my throat. I took a red pen from Silas's desk. I didn't just cross out the line. I slashed through it until the paper tore. I spent the next 3 hours writing. I wrote by the light of a single desk lamp, fighting through waves of nausea and blindness. I wrote about the nights I spent hungry. I wrote about the loneliness of the library at 3 a.m. I wrote about the fallacy of the safety net. I stopped trying to be the daughter they wanted and started being the woman they had created. When I finished, the speech was no longer a celebration. It was a manifesto. The sun was beginning to bleed gray light through the curtains when Silas walked in. He was holding a garment bag. "Did you sleep?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "No." He unzipped the bag. Inside was a black suit. It was old. The lapels were too wide, and the fabric was thick wool that would be sweltering in the June heat, but it was immaculate. It had been pressed so sharply you could cut your finger on the creases. "I bought this suit for your father's high school graduation," Silas said, running a hand over the fabric. "I haven't worn it in 30 years. There were dark bruises under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, but it was the eyes themselves that held my attention. They were bloodshot, the pupils blown wide from the medication and the adrenaline, but they were burning. They were the eyes of someone who had walked through fire and decided to bring the flames with her. I was not going to that ceremony to receive a piece of paper. I was going to a funeral. The funeral of the girl who begged for love. I put on my cap and gown. The black fabric fell over me like armor. "Let's go," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's finish this." The morning of the graduation ceremony arrived, not with the gentle warmth of early summer, but with a blinding, aggressive brightness that seemed to sear right through my retinas. The university stadium was a cauldron of noise and color, packed with 5,000 people. The air vibrated with the low roar of excited conversations, the rustling of synthetic gowns, and the tuning of the brass band, to anyone else. It was the sound of celebration. To me, it sounded like static on a radio tuned to a dead channel. I felt as though I were walking on cotton. The 3 painkillers I had swallowed earlier had done their job, perhaps too well. They had not removed the pain so much as they had pushed it to the other side of a thick glass wall. I could see the pain. I could sense its massive, dark presence waiting for me. But for now, I was floating in a chemical detachment. My feet touched the concrete floor of the holding area, but I could not feel the impact. My hands, clutching the rolled-up scroll of my revised speech, felt like they belonged to a mannequin. Around me, my classmates were adjusting their mortarboards and taking frantic selfies. They were crying, hugging, shouting inside jokes. They were surrounded by families who had flown in from across the country, parents who were pinning corsages and straightening ties. I stood alone near a stack of folding chairs, a black island in a sea of maroon and gold. My phone buzzed in the hidden pocket of my gown. It was a sharp, angry insect against my hip. I knew I should not look. I knew it would be nothing that brought me peace, but the reflex was ingrained, a Pavlovian response to the device that had been my only tether to my family for years. I pulled it out. The screen brightness was set to maximum, stinging my sensitive eyes. It was a multimedia message from my mother. The image was high definition, vibrant enough to mock me. It was a selfie taken at a tilted angle, capturing a background of impossibly blue water and a pristine white deck. In the foreground, 3 faces crowded the frame. My mother, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and oversized sunglasses, was blowing a kiss. My father was grinning, his face flushed red from the sun, holding up a glass filled with a bright turquoise liquid and a slice of pineapple. Julian was in the middle, giving a peace sign, looking tanned and relaxed. They looked like a poster for a life I had never been invited to. Below the image was the caption, "Cheers from the Obsidian. Thinking of you on your big day. Send pics. Proud parents. Living the life. Caribbean dream." I stared at the hashtag, "Proud parents." The audacity of it made me laugh. A short, sharp sound that made a girl nearby look at me with concern. They were proud, not of me, but of the idea of me. They were proud that they could post about having a valedictorian daughter while they drank rum punch 1,000 miles away, funded by the money that should have paid for my doctor. I slid the phone back into my pocket. It felt heavy, like a stone. That was it. That was the final severance. The last thread of guilt I had felt about changing my speech snapped. "Dahlia Lockhart," a faculty marshal called out, holding a clipboard. "You are up? Stage right? Now." I began to walk. The tunnel leading to the field was cool and dark. But as I stepped out into the open stadium, the heat hit me like a physical blow. The roar of the crowd intensified, a physical wave of sound that washed over me. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Left, right, do not trip, do not vomit. I ascended the stairs to the stage. The wood creaked under my heels. I walked past the row of seated faculty members, their robes heavy and velvet, nodding solemnly as I passed. I approached the podium. It was a massive wooden structure, emblazoned with the university seal, bristling with microphones. I gripped the sides of the podium. The wood was warm from the sun. I looked out. The view was overwhelming, a sea of faces, a kaleidoscope of colors. I squinted against the glare, scanning the front rows, the VIP section reserved for the families of honor students and donors. I found row A. It was a gap tooth and a perfect smile. Seats 4, 5, and 6 were empty. No parents, no brother, just 3 metal folding chairs reflecting the harsh sunlight. But in seat 7, there was a figure. Grandpa Silas sat there, upright and rigid. He was wearing the black wool suit he had shown me, a garment 30 years out of style but pressed to perfection. He was sweating profusely in the heat, his face glistening, but he did not move. He looked like a stone sentinel. When our eyes met across the distance, he did not wave frantically like the other parents. He simply raised one hand and gave me a firm thumbs up. One of me is worth 1,000 of them. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of cut grass and humidity. I unfolded my paper. The red ink of my revisions looked like arterial spray against the white page. "Welcome, faculty, families, and the graduating class of 2026, I began. My voice boomed through the stadium speakers. Echoing slightly, it sounded strong, foreign to my own ears. "We are often told that today is a shared victory," I continued. My eyes locked on the teleprompter that was scrolling the old speech I had submitted weeks ago. I ignored it. I looked down at my paper. "We are told to thank the village that raised us, to thank the parents who sacrificed. the support systems that caught us when we fell. A hush began to fall over the crowd. The cadence of my voice was not the celebratory, rhythmic lilt of a standard commencement address. It was flat, hard, and cold. But standing here today, I see empty seats, I said, gesturing vaguely to the front row. And I know that for some of us, there was no village, there was no safety net. There was only the cold, hard ground, and the choice to get up or stay down. I saw the dean shift in his seat behind me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the script. I am the valedictorian, I said, gripping the podium tighter as a wave of dizziness washed over me. The glass wall of the painkillers was starting to crack. I have the highest GPA in this university's history, and I can tell you the exact cost of that number. It cost 3 jobs. It cost 4 hours of sleep a night. It cost the ability to trust the people who were supposed to protect me. My vision blurred for a second. The sea of faces smearing into a watercolor painting, I blinked hard, forcing the world back into focus. We are taught that success is a currency that buys love, I pushed on, my voice rising, driven by a fury that burned brighter than the fever in my blood. We are taught that if we are smart enough, successful enough, trophies enough, we will finally be worthy of attention. But that is a lie. You cannot buy the attention of people who are bankrupt of soul. The silence in the stadium was absolute now. 5,000 people were holding their breath. To my fellow graduates who are sitting there alone, I said, looking directly at the camera that I knew was broadcasting to the giant screens on either side of the stage. To those of you who built yourselves from scrap parts because no one gave you the blueprints, you are the only ones who own this moment. Do not share it. Do not give it away. I paused. The pain in my head spiked. A warning shot. We are free, I whispered into the microphone, the sound amplified to a deafening volume. Because when you have lost everything you thought you needed, you realize the truth. I took a breath to deliver the final line, the line that would sever me from the Lockhart legacy forever. We do not owe anyone our lives, I said. We do not owe them our silence, and we certainly do not owe them our snap. It was not a sound I heard with my ears. It was a sound I felt, inside the deepest recesses of my brain. Something gave way. It felt like a violin string being pulled too tight until it disintegrated. A wet, hot sensation flooded the base of my skull. The pain was immediate and total. It was not a headache. It was an annihilation. It felt as if a lightning bolt had struck the top of my head and exited through my spine. My mid-sentence froze. My mouth was open, but the words evaporated. Time didn't just slow down. It shattered into jagged fragments. I saw the microphone in front of me. It was silver and gleaming. Suddenly, the light reflecting off it elongated, stretching into long, blinding needles of white laser, the sound of the stadium, the wind, the distant traffic, the breathing of 5,000 people, warped. It dropped in pitch, turning into a low, demonic groan that vibrated in my teeth. Then, it spiked into a high-pitched scream, a sinusoidal wave of electronic feedback that wasn't coming from the speakers, but from my own auditory nerves dying. Tunnel vision. It happened exactly as the medical textbooks described, but with a violence that words could not capture. The periphery of my vision turned black, not a fading to gray, but an absolute, abyssal blackness that rushed inward at impossible speed. The world narrowed down to a single focal point, the grain of the wood on the podium. I tried to say, "Help." My tongue felt like a dead fish in my mouth. It was heavy, numb, and refused to obey the commands from a brain that was rapidly drowning in its own blood. I tried to grip the podium to keep standing. I sent the signal to my hands. Hold on. Squeeze. Nothing happened. My hands were no longer mine. They slid off the varnished wood, useless and limp. Then, gravity took over. I felt my knees buckle. It was a slow, sickening sensation. Like the hydraulics on a roller coaster failing. The podium rushed upwards. The sky rushed downwards. I was falling. In that elongated second of descent, I was hyper-aware of everything. I saw a dust mote floating in a sunbeam, suspended in the air, golden and perfect. I smelled the floor wax on the stage. I heard the gasp of the crowd, a collective intake of breath that sounded like the ocean pulling back before a tsunami. Thud. My body hit the stage floor. It was a jarring, bone-rattling impact, but I felt no pain from it. My nervous system was already overloaded, consumed by the firestorm in my brain. The microphone stand clattered down beside me. Booming through the speakers like a cannon shot, chaos erupted. The low groan of the world sped up, turning into a cacophony of screams and shouting. She collapsed! Get a medic! Oh my God! I was lying on my side, my cheek pressed against the rough, carpeted surface of the stage. My field of vision was a pinhole now, a tiny circle of light in a universe of darkness. I could not move. I could not breathe. I was a prisoner in a collapsing house. But through that tiny pinhole of vision, I saw movement. In the front row, beyond the barrier, beyond the security guards who were frozen in shock, a figure was moving. It was Silas. He didn't look like an 80-year-old man. He moved with the explosive, desperate speed of a soldier charging a trench. He vaulted over the velvet rope barrier, stumbling but recovering instantly. He shoved a security guard aside with a force that sent the younger man reeling. He was running towards the stairs. He was running towards me. His face was contorted in a mask of pure, primal terror. His mouth was open, screaming something I could not hear over the roaring in my ears, but I could read his lips. Dahlia! The darkness rushed in, claiming the last circle of light. The last thing I saw was his hand reaching out, grasping for air, grasping for me, before the shutter clicked closed and the world went absolute, terrified black. The darkness was not empty. It was heavy, viscous, and loud. It roared with the sound of rushing water, a relentless tide that sought to pull me under, while my body lay strapped to a gurney, racing through the sterile white corridors of the trauma center. My mind was adrift in a cold, black ocean. I was not there to witness the chaos of my own arrival, but I have pieced together the minutes and hours that followed with the forensic precision of a lawyer building a case. I have collected the testimonies of nurses, the logs of phone calls, and the haunted confessionals of my grandfather. I know now that I was brought in as a Jane Doe until they found my student ID in the pocket of my gown. I know that the scissors they used to cut the gown off my body destroyed the only piece of formal clothing I had ever owned. I know that the neurosurgeon, Dr. Evans, took one look at the CT scan and saw the catastrophe inside my skull. It was an arteriovenous malformation, an AVM, a tangle of abnormal blood vessels connecting arteries and veins in the brain, a congenital defect I had carried since birth. It was a ticking time bomb made of flesh and blood. For 23 years, it had sat dormant, but the stress, the lack of sleep, the cheap caffeine, and the skyrocketing blood pressure of the last few months had finally cut the wire. The bomb had detonated. In the hallway outside the intensive care unit, a different kind of violence was taking place. It was quiet, bureaucratic, and devastating. Grandpa Silas stood at the nurse's station. He was still wearing his heavy wool suit, now stained with sweat and the dust of the stadium floor. His hands, usually steady enough to calibrate an engine to within 1,000th of an inch, were shaking so violently he could barely hold the pen the nurse had offered him. "I need to sign," Silas said. His voice was a rasp, stripped raw by the screaming he had done in the ambulance. "She needs the surgery. Do it. Open her up and save her." The administrative nurse, a woman whose face was softened by pity, but hardened by protocol, gently pulled the clipboard away. "I am sorry, Mr. Lockhart," she said. "We checked the records. You are not listed as her legal guardian. You are not the next of kin. She is 23, but because she is unconscious and incapacitated, we need consent from a parent or a spouse. Do you have power of attorney?" "Power of attorney?" Silas looked at her as if she were speaking a foreign language. "I am her grandfather. I raised her more than they ever did. I am the one who is here." I know, the nurse said, and she truly looked like she wished she could break the rules. But the law is the law. If we operate without consent, and she dies, or if there are complications the hospital gets sued, we need to reach her parents. We need verbal consent at the very least. The clock on the wall ticked. Every second was a drop of blood leaking into my brain tissue, compressing the centers that controlled my speech, my movement, my memories. "Call them," Silas ordered. "Call them now." The nurse picked up the phone. She dialed the number listed in my emergency contact file, my mother's cell phone. It rang, and rang, and rang, on the other side of the world, on the deck of the yacht Obsidian. The phone vibrated against a teak table. It was likely dismissed as a nuisance, a buzzing fly interrupting the flow of conversation. The call went to voicemail. "No answer," the nurse said. "Try the father," Silas commanded. She dialed Robert Lockhart's number. This time, the call was rejected immediately, sent straight to voicemail. The busy button had been pressed. They were in the middle of a toast, perhaps, or maybe Julian was telling a joke, and a ringing phone would have ruined the punchline. "They are declining the call," the nurse said, her voice tight. "Mr. Lockhart, we are running out of time. Her intracranial pressure is spiking." Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. It was an old, battered flip phone, the kind that survived drops onto concrete floors. He dialed my father's number with trembling fingers. He put it on speaker so the doctor could hear the consent. The ringing tone echoed in the quiet hospital corridor. Once, twice, 3 times. Then, a click. "Dad?" The voice on the other end was slurred, thick with alcohol and annoyance. "Dad, why are you calling me? We are in the middle of the VIP mixer. I told you, international roaming is expensive." "Robert," Silas said. His voice was terrifyingly calm, the calm of a man holding back a tidal wave. "Shut up and listen to me. Dahlia is in the hospital. She collapsed at the graduation." There was a pause on the line, then a scoff, a wet, dismissive sound. "Collapsed?" Robert let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh, for God's sake. She fainted? It is the heat, Dad, or she didn't eat breakfast. She's always doing this, making a scene. She is probably just hypoglycemic. Tell her to drink some sugar water and stop ruining the day." The nurse's eyes went wide. Dr. Evans, who had stepped out of the trauma bay, froze. "Sugar water?" Silas whispered. The rage that erupted from him then was not the anger of a father. It was the fury of a protector who had failed. He screamed into the phone, a sound so raw it made the receptionist flinch. "She is dying, you son of a bitch. She is not fainting. She has a bleed in her brain, a ruptured vessel. She needs emergency neurosurgery right now, or she is going to be a corpse in an hour. Do you understand me? Your daughter is bleeding to death inside her own head." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for 5 seconds. 5 seconds where the only sound was the static of the satellite connection and the faint thumping of techno music in the background of the yacht. "Brain surgery?" Robert's voice lost some of its swagger, but none of its selfishness. It just became whiny. "Are you sure? Doctors exaggerate these things to drive up the bill. We don't have look. Is it really that bad?" "Doctor," Silas shoved the phone at Dr. Evans. "Tell him, Mr. Lockhart," Dr. Evans said. His tone clipped and professional. "This is Dr. Evans, Chief of Neurosurgery. Your daughter has a grade 4 hemorrhage. If I do not relieve the pressure and clip the vessel within the next 20 minutes, she will experience brainstem death. Do I have your consent to operate?" There was hesitation, a shifting of priorities. Yes, if it is that serious," Robert stammered. "But look, we cannot come back. Not right now. Julian is literally about to sign the contract with the angel investors. It is the closing dinner. If we leave, the deal falls through. We are talking about millions here. I am asking for consent to operate. Sir, not for your travel itinerary," Dr. Evans said, his jaw tightening. "Fine. Yes. Do whatever," Robert said, his voice rising in irritation. as if he were ordering a mechanic to fix a flat tire so he could get on with his day. "Just keep the costs down if you can, and tell her we will FaceTime her tomorrow when things settle down. We cannot leave Julian alone right now. He needs support." The line went dead. Robert had hung up. Silas stood there, staring at the phone in the doctor's hand. He looked like he had been shot in the chest. The betrayal was total. It was not just negligence, it was an active choice. They had weighed my life against a signature on a contract, and the scale had tipped in favor of the ink. "We have verbal consent," Dr. Evans said, handing the phone back to Silas. He looked at the nurses. "But note in the chart that we are proceeding under the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act as well. 2 physician certification. I don't want that man's permission to be the only thing standing between this girl and the grave. Let's move." The doors to the operating room swung open. I was wheeled in. The last thing my physical body knew was the cold touch of anesthesia and the hum of the saw. For the next 6 hours, they cut into my skull. They navigated the minefield of my brain, clipping the malformed veins, suctioning away the blood that had pooled where thoughts used to be. It was a battle fought on a microscopic scale, and while I lay there, sliced open and vulnerable, the silence of the ocean swallowed me whole. I did not wake up after the surgery. I sank deeper. I entered a coma, a state of suspended existence where time dissolved. 3 days passed, 72 hours, 4,320 minutes. In the waiting room, the world continued. Silas did not leave. He refused the cot the nurses offered him. He sat on a hard blue plastic chair outside the ICU doors, guarding the threshold like a gargoyle. He drank bitter vending machine coffee that tasted like burnt plastic. He ate stale crackers. He watched the door. He told me later that he was afraid if he closed his eyes, the Reaper would slip past him. He was the only line of defense I had left. The staff started whispering about him. The old man in the wool suit who smelled of engine oil and grief. One of the nurses brought him a blanket. He draped it over his knees but stayed upright. And while Silas held his vigil in the fluorescent purgatory of the hospital, another narrative was unfolding in the digital world. My phone, which Silas had retrieved from the pocket of my ruined gown, sat on the small table next to him. It buzzed relentlessly with notifications. Not from my parents asking if I was alive, not from Julian asking if the surgery was successful. The notifications were from Instagram. Since I followed Julian, his stories were automatically pushed to my feed. Silas, in a moment of morbid curiosity or perhaps seeking fuel for his hatred. Tap the screen. Story 1. 12 hours ago. A video of Julian popping a bottle of Dom Perignon. The cork flew into the blue sky. Foam sprayed over the deck. My father was in the background, laughing, a cigar clamped between his teeth. Text overlay. We make our own luck. Contract signed. Vanguard success. Story 2. 6 hours ago. A plate of Wagyu beef and truffle mash. Text overlay. Eating like kings. The grind never stops, but neither does the feast. Story 3. 2 hours ago. A selfie of the 3 of them, Julian, Robert, and Cynthia. Dressed in white linen, dancing under string lights. They looked euphoric. They looked unburdened. Text overlay. Party all night. Life is not waiting for anyone. So why should we? Caribbean Nights family. First. Family first. The hashtag glowed on the screen in the dim hospital waiting room. Inside the ICU, 10 feet away, a machine breathed for me. Whoosh, click, whoosh, click. My head was wrapped in thick bandages, a drain tube snaking out from under the gauze to carry away the excess fluid. My face was swollen, bruised purple and yellow. There was not a single mention of me on their social media. No pray for our daughter, no family emergency. Silence. To admit I was dying would be to admit a flaw in their perfect week. It would rain on their parade. It would distract the investors. So they erased me. They simply pretended that the phone call with Silas had never happened, that the girl in the hospital bed did not exist. They buried me under a mountain of filtered photos and fake smiles. But the ocean of their indifference was not just silent. It was cold, and in the depths of my coma, I began to feel that coldness seeping into my bones. It was the chill of realization that when I woke up, if I woke up, I would be an orphan. Silas watched the screen go dark. He put the phone down. He looked at his hands, the knuckles white. "You stay with me, Dahlia," he whispered to the closed doors. "You stay with me. You let them have their party. You and I have work to do." He did not know yet that the party was about to end. He did not know that the silence of the ocean was about to be broken by a storm of my own making. But as the third day bled into the fourth, the monitors in my room beeped a change in rhythm. The pressure in my brain was stabilizing. The void was receding, and I was coming back, not as the girl who fell, but as something else entirely. Waking up was not a cinematic gasp for air. It was a slow, agonizing crawl through a swamp of broken glass. The first thing I knew was pain. It was a dull, rhythmic throbbing that seemed to originate from the very center of my being, radiating outward until my fingers and toes felt like they were vibrating. My skull felt too tight, as if it had been wrapped in iron bands and left to shrink in the sun. The second thing I knew was thirst. My throat felt like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper. I tried to swallow, but my tongue was a heavy, dry object that refused to move. I opened my eyes. The light was dim. Thank God. The fluorescent strips overhead had been turned off, leaving the room bathed in the soft, artificial twilight of medical monitors. I blinked, trying to clear the sticky film from my vision. There was a shape in the chair next to my bed, a heap of gray and black. "Grandpa?" I rasped. The sound was barely a whisper, a crackle of dry leaves. The shape moved instantly. Silas jerked awake, his head snapping up from his chest. In the gloom, he looked terrifying. His eyes were sunken into deep, dark hollows. His skin was the color of ash. A thick white stubble covered his jaw, contrasting with the dark circles under his eyes. He looked as though he had aged 20 years in the span of 3 days. The crisp wool suit he had worn to the graduation was now rumpled and stained, the tie loosened and hanging askew like a noose. "Dahlia?" He scrambled out of the chair, his knees cracking loudly. He leaned over the rail of the bed, his hand hovering over my face, afraid to touch me. "Oh, thank God. You are back. You are back." "Water," I croaked. He grabbed a plastic cup with a straw and held it to my lips. I drank greedily, the cool liquid shocking my system back into functionality. Did I? I paused, the memory of the podium rushing back to me, the heat, the darkness, the fall. Did I die? "You tried to," Silas said, his voice thick with emotion. He brushed a strand of hair away from my bandaged forehead. "But you are a Lockhart, the real kind. You are too stubborn to die." I tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea pushed me back into the pillows. "How long?" 4 days, Silas said. "They had to clip a vein in your brain, an AVM. You have been sleeping a long time, kid." 4 days. I closed my eyes, letting the timeline settle. 4 days meant the graduation was over. It meant the yacht trip was halfway done. "Did they come?" I asked. I did not have to specify who they were. Silas's face hardened. The relief vanished, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. No, he didn't offer excuses. He didn't lie. "My phone," I said. "Where is it?" Silas hesitated. He looked at the small bedside table where my phone sat face down. It was vibrating, not the occasional buzz of a message, but a constant, relentless shivering against the hard plastic surface. It sounded like an angry hornet trapped under a glass. "You do not want to look at that right now," Silas said gently. "Rest first. Give it to me, Grandpa." He sighed, the fight draining out of him, and handed me the device. The screen lit up. I expected to see texts from my mother, perhaps a delayed apology, or a demand for updates on my condition. I unlocked the screen. I had 142 notifications on Instagram, 200 mentions on Twitter, 70 unread text messages. My thumb hovered over the Instagram icon. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, setting off a rapid beeping on the heart monitor next to me. I opened the app. The first thing I saw was not a photo from my friends. It was a post from a girl named Sarah, my roommate. Sarah was a journalism major, fierce and protective, the kind of person who documented everything. She had posted a photo collage. On the left side of the split screen was a photo taken 4 days ago. It was blurry, taken from a distance, but the subject was unmistakable. It was me, lying unconscious on the stage, a paramedic cutting open my graduation gown, my face pale and lifeless. On the right side was a screenshot. It was the photo Julian had posted on his story, just hours after I collapsed, the one of him holding the lobster, grinning, with my parents toasting in the background. The caption Sarah had written was short, brutal, and viral. While our valedictorian Dahlia Lockhart was being rushed into emergency brain surgery after collapsing on stage. Her family was busy posting this. They didn't show up to her graduation. They haven't shown up to the hospital. They are currently on the mega yacht Obsidian, blocking calls from the doctors who needed consent to save her life. This is what family values looks like in the 1%. Justice for Dahlia. Eat the rich Vanguard, Horizon. I stared at the numbers. The post had 42,000 likes. I clicked on the comments. It was a bloodbath. User_293. This is the most disgusting thing I have ever seen. I went to high school with Julian. Guy is a total fraud. Hope his company burns. Law_student_X. I was at the graduation. The sound when she hit the floor, I thought she was dead. And they are eating lobster? Vile. Investor_watch. Is this the Julian Lockhart pitching the Pet Connect app? We were looking at his deck. Hard pass. Character matters. I scrolled, and scrolled, and scrolled. The internet, usually a chaotic void of screaming voices, had aligned its target, and the target was my brother. People had found his company page. They had found his personal profile. They were flooding his comments with snake emojis and screenshots of Sarah's post. They were tagging the investors he had bragged about meeting. They were doxing the location of the yacht. They know, I whispered, looking up at Silas. Everybody knows. Your friend Sarah came by yesterday, Silas grunted. She took a picture of me sleeping in the chair, posted that too, said, "The only Lockhart man worth a damn." That one got 20,000 shares. I felt a strange, cold satisfaction unfurl in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was darker than that. It was the feeling of a scale finally, violently, tipping back into balance. Then, the phone in my hand buzzed again. A call. Caller ID. Mom. I stared at the name. They are calling, I said. They have been calling for the last 6 hours, Silas said. Since the internet signal on their boat got strong enough for them to see the notifications. Did you answer? No. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then I opened my text messages. There were 53 unread messages from my mother and father. I started at the bottom, scrolling back to the beginning of the storm. Mom, yesterday, 4 p.m. Dahlia, pick up the phone. Why is your friend posting lies about us? Mom, yesterday, 4:15 p.m. Take it down. Tell her to delete it immediately. You are making us look like monsters. Dad, yesterday, 5:30 p.m. Julian just lost the meeting with the Silicon Valley Group. They said they don't do business with people who have moral liquidity issues. Do you have any idea what you have done? Mom, yesterday, 7 p.m. We are trying to get a flight back, but there are no seats until tomorrow. This is a nightmare. Fix this. Dahlia, post a video saying it was a misunderstanding. Say we were stuck in transit. Julian, today 8 a.m. You ruined my life. You actually ruined my life. I am going to sue you for defamation. Not one message asked how I was. Not one message asked if the surgery was successful. Not one message said, I love you. They were bleeding money and reputation. And they wanted me to be the bandage. The phone rang again. Caller ID. Dad, I looked at Silas. He was watching me closely, his blue eyes hard as flint. You do not have to talk to them, he said. You do not owe them a voice, not anymore. I looked at the phone. My thumb hovered over the green button. I could pick up. I could hear their excuses. I could let them gaslight me into believing that I was the one who had been selfish for collapsing at an inconvenient time. But then I remembered the feeling of the floor hitting my face. I remembered the empty seats in the front row. I remembered the taste of the sugar water my father had suggested I drink while my brain bled. I pressed the red button. Then, I went into the settings. I scrolled down to the contact list, block caller. I did it for Mom, for Dad, for Julian. Let them scream into the void, I whispered. Good girl, Silas said, a grim smile touching his lips. Let them die in your silence. The room fell quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of the monitor. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't lonely, it was powerful. I was injured, I was broke, and I was homeless. But I held the one thing they desperately needed, the truth, and I was not going to give it to them. But the peace was short-lived. 10 minutes later, there was a commotion in the hallway. I heard the squeak of polished leather shoes on linoleum, a sharp contrast to the soft rubber soles of the nurses. Sir, you cannot go in there. That is a restricted recovery zone, a nurse's voice called out, sounding flustered. I have a legal mandate, a smooth baritone voice replied. Time is of the essence regarding the client's asset management. The door to my room swung open. A man stepped in. He did not look like he belonged in a hospital. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom in Manhattan. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Silas's house. He was holding a sleek leather briefcase. He had salt and pepper hair, perfectly coiffed, and eyes that scanned the room with predatory efficiency. He looked at me, lying in the bed with tubes running out of my arms, and did not flinch. Ms. Dahlia Lockhart? He asked. Silas was on his feet in a second. He moved between the man and my bed, his chest puffing out, blocking the stranger's path. Who the hell are you? Silas growled. Get out. The man adjusted his glasses, unfazed. My name is Arthur Thorne. I am a senior partner at Thorne Associates. I represent the trust established by the late Eleanor Lockhart. Silas froze. Eleanor? I have been trying to reach Ms. Lockhart for weeks. Mr. Thorne said, stepping around Silas to look at me. But my calls were blocked, and my letters were intercepted. I assumed by your father. What trust? I asked, my voice barely audible. The Education and Enterprise Trust. Mr. Thorne said, your grandmother left it for you. It matured 4 days ago, on your 23rd birthday. However, given your current medical condition, he paused, looking at the charts at the foot of my bed. Your father contacted my firm an hour ago, Thorne said, his voice lowering. He claims that due to your brain injury, you are mentally incapacitated. He is filing for emergency conservatorship to take control of the trust assets immediately. My blood ran cold. The headache flared, a spike of agony behind my eyes. They weren't just trying to save face. They were trying to steal the only thing my grandmother had left me. He wants the money, Silas spat. He needs it to cover Julian's mess. Precisely, Thorne said. If he gets that conservatorship, he can liquidate the trust. I am here to determine if you are competent, Ms. Lockhart, because if you are, I need you to sign some documents, right now, before he lands at the airport. Silas looked at the door, then back at me. He walked over and slammed the door shut, locking it. He is not getting in here, Silas said, rolling up the sleeves of his dirty shirt. And you better be on our side, Mr. Lawyer, because if you are not, you are going to need a surgeon too. Mr. Thorne smiled, a thin, razor-sharp expression. He opened his briefcase on the bedside table. Mr. Lockhart, Thorne said, I detest your son, your wife, Eleanor, was my first client. I am not here to help him. I am here to help Dahlia bury him. I looked at the stack of documents he placed on the bed. The paper was crisp and white, waiting for a signature. Give me the pen, I said, On the fifth day, the circus came to town. I had spent the previous night signing documents with Mr. Thorne, my hand trembling but my resolve turning into reinforced steel. We had barely hidden the paperwork in Silas's battered rucksack when the noise began down the hallway. It was not the usual hushed tones of nurses or the squeak of medical carts. It was a commotion. It was the sound of voices pitched specifically to be overheard, the aggressive click of camera shutters, and the heavy, confident footsteps of people who believed they owned every room they walked into. My door flew open. They did not come in quietly. They did not come in with heads bowed in shame or eyes red from weeping. They burst in, bringing with them a gust of expensive perfume, the smell of ozone, and the blinding flash of photography. My mother, Cynthia, was the first through the door. She was wearing a beige cashmere cardigan that looked soft enough to sleep in and a pair of trousers that probably cost more than my entire 4 years of tuition. Her skin was a rich, golden bronze, the kind of tan you can only get from spending 4 days lying on the deck of a yacht in the Caribbean while your daughter bleeds out in a hospital. But her face was a masterpiece of manufactured grief. Her makeup was artfully minimal, just enough to look pale and distraught under the tan. "Dahlia! Oh my God! My baby!" She shrieked it. It was a theatrical, piercing wail that made the nurse in the corner jump. Before I could even brace myself, she launched herself at the bed. She threw her arms around my shoulders, pressing my head into her chest. The pain was instantaneous. Her arm hit the fresh incision site on the side of my head. I gasped. A sharp, ragged sound of agony. But she did not let go. She held me tighter, rocking back and forth for the benefit of the 3 photographers who were crowding the doorway. "We are here, baby. We are here," she sobbed, her tears wetting the hospital gown. "Mommy is here." I couldn't breathe. The scent of her, Chanel No. 5 and sea salt, was suffocating. I tried to push her away, but my arms were weak, heavy with IV lines. Behind her stood my father, Robert, and my brother, Julian. They were flanked by 2 men holding video cameras and a woman with a microphone who looked like she was from a local news station. My father was wearing a suit, but he had dispensed with the tie, the top button of his shirt undone to suggest a man who had rushed here in a panic. He stood with his hands on his hips, head bowed, nodding solemnly at the floor as if the weight of the world were on his shoulders. And Julian was holding his phone up, the ring light attached to the case blinding me. He was live streaming. "Guys, we made it," Julian said into the phone, his voice dropping to a somber, husky register that I knew he practiced in the mirror. "We just landed. We came straight from the tarmac. The family is reunited. Look at her. She is a fighter. Thank you all for the prayers. The power of positivity is real." He panned the phone over to me, capturing my bruised face, the bandages, the tubes. He was using my trauma as content. He was monetizing my near-death experience to rehabilitate his brand. "Get off," I managed to wheeze, trying to shove my mother away. She pulled back, but only enough to cut my face in her hands. Her nails, manicured to perfection in a soft nude shade, dug into my cheeks. "I am so sorry we were late, darling," she said, loud enough for the reporters to hear clearly. The flight delays were a nightmare. The storm in the Gulf grounded everything. We were screaming at the airline staff, begging them to get us home to you. We were trapped. Dahlia, trapped and terrified. It was a lie. A bold, verifiable lie. I had checked the weather reports. The skies over the Caribbean had been crystal clear for the last week. "There was no storm," I whispered. My voice was raspy, broken. Cynthia's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. She leaned in closer, bringing her face right next to my ear, ostensibly to hug me again. "Shut up," she hissed. The sound was so low only I could hear it, slipping through the gap in her teeth like venom. "Do not cause a scene, Dahlia. Smile for the camera. We have a narrative to fix." "You left me," I said, louder this time. "We are here now," my father boomed, stepping forward to interrupt me, playing the role of the relieved patriarch. He placed a massive bouquet of white lilies on the bedside table. They were funeral flowers. The irony was likely lost on him. "Thank God you are safe. Princess, the doctors say you are going to be fine. It was just a little scare." A little scare. I had a zipper of staples running up my skull. "This is a private medical recovery room." The roar came from the corner. Grandpa Silas had been sitting so still that they hadn't noticed him. Or perhaps they had chosen to ignore him because he didn't fit the aesthetic. He stood up now, his chest heaving. He didn't look frail anymore. He looked like a tank. "Get those cameras out of here," Silas bellowed. He didn't wait for them to comply. He marched over to the cameraman from the news station and shoved the lens down. "You have 3 seconds to leave before I break that equipment over your head." 1. "Sir, we have permission from the father," the reporter started. 2. Silas grabbed the reporter by the collar of his jacket and physically marched him backwards. Okay, we are leaving." The reporter scrambled out into the hallway. Sensing that the old man was not bluffing, Julian quickly ended his live stream. "Gotta go, guys. Doctor is coming in. Love you all. Lockhart strong." Silas slammed the door shut. He locked it. Then he pulled the blinds down over the window that looked into the corridor. The room plunged into sudden semi-darkness. The performance was over. The audience was gone. And instantly, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My mother stopped crying. She stood up, smoothing down her cashmere cardigan, and wiped her face with the back of her hand. The devastated mother was gone. The cold, calculating socialite was back. "Well," she said, looking at me with distaste, "you certainly look like hell." "Nice to see you too, Mom," I said. My voice was gaining strength, fueled by a cold rage that was filling my veins like ice water. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" It was my father. He picked up the bouquet of lilies he had just placed on the table and threw them on the floor. The vase shattered. Water and flowers sprawled across the linoleum. "What I have done?" I asked, looking at the mess. "The stock," he shouted, his face turning a blotchy purple. "Julian's investors pulled out this morning. The VC firm sent a cease and desist letter. Our reputation is in the toilet. Dahlia. And it is all because of that dramatic stunt you pulled on stage." "I had a brain hemorrhage, Dad," I said. "I didn't do a cartwheel. I collapsed." "You could have collapsed backstage," he yelled, pacing the small room. "You could have walked off when you felt dizzy. But no, you had to faint right in front of the live stream. You had to let your little friends take pictures. Do you know how much money we have lost in the last 48 hours? Do you?" "I don't care," I said. The words hung in the air. My mother stepped forward. She reached into her designer handbag, a Birkin that cost more than my annual salary, and pulled out a folded document. "We don't have time for your teenage rebellion," she said, her voice sharp and businesslike. "We have a PR crisis team waiting in the lobby. They have drafted a statement for you." She threw the paper onto my lap. I looked down at it. Official statement of Dahlia Lockhart. I would like to clarify the rumors surrounding my recent hospitalization. My parents and brother were not absent due to negligence. They were delayed by unavoidable travel complications while securing business for our family's future. The reports of them abandoning me are false and malicious exaggerations spread by third parties. I am surrounded by my loving family and ask for privacy. "You want me to sign this?" I asked, looking up at her. "I don't want you to sign it," Cynthia said, leaning over the bed rail, her eyes cold and dead. "I expect you to sign it, and after you sign it, Julian is going to record a video of you reading it. You are going to say that your friend Sarah is a liar. You are going to say that we have been on the phone with the doctors every hour, and if I don't?" Cynthia smiled. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Then I stop the payments," she said softly. "You know you don't have insurance. Dahlia, your father canceled it. This surgery, the ICU stay, the rehabilitation you are going to need, It is going to cost upwards of $200,000. Maybe three. You don't have that kind of money. We do. You sign that paper, she continued. And we pay the bill. We transfer you to a private suite. We take care of you. You refuse? We walk out that door, and you are left with a debt that will bury you before you even start your life. You will be bankrupt at 23. I looked at Julian. He was leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone, deleting negative comments. He looked up, catching my eye. "Come on, sis," he said, his voice wheedling. "It is not a big deal. Just a little white lie to help the family. Look, I will make it worth your while." He walked over to the bed. "You help me clear my name," Julian said, "and I will give you equity, 5% of the company, 5%. That could be worth millions in a few years when the app takes off. You will be set for life. 5% of a fraud, 5% of nothing." "You really think," I said, my voice trembling not with fear, but with the sheer effort of holding back my hatred, "that you can buy me with 5% of a hamster app?" "It is a pet connectivity ecosystem," Julian snapped. "And don't be ungrateful. 5% is generous for someone who just sleeps all day." I looked at Silas. He was standing by the door, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't interfering. He was letting me fight this battle. He knew I needed to do this. I looked back at my parents, at the shattered flowers on the floor, at the paper on my lap. They thought they held all the cards. They thought I was the same desperate little girl who used to beg for them to come to her piano recitals. They thought money was the only language I spoke because it was the only language they understood. I slowly picked up the document. My mother's eyes lit up. "Good girl. I have a pen right here." She held out a gold-plated pen. I took the paper in both hands. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the small room. I ripped it in half, then in quarters, then into eighths. I threw the confetti of their lies into my mother's face. "Get out," I said. My mother froze, the pieces of paper fluttering down onto her expensive cardigan. Her mouth dropped open. "Excuse me?" "I said get out," I repeated, my voice rising, cutting through the air like a blade. "I am not signing your lies. I am not saving your reputation. And I am certainly not taking 5% of your garbage company. You listen to me. You ungrateful little—" My father started, stepping forward with his hand raised, his face twisting into a snarl. "No, you listen," I shouted, the pain in my head forgotten. "You gambled on me dying. That is what you did. You waited. You didn't answer the phone because you were hoping nature would take its course so you could keep the trust fund money." The color drained from my father's face. "What did you say?" "I know about the Education and Enterprise Trust," I said, savoring the look of pure terror that washed over him. "I know about Grandma Eleanor's money. I know it matured on my birthday. And I know that if I had died, or if I had been declared incompetent, you would have become the trustee." My mother looked at my father. "Robert? What is she talking about? What trust?" Ah, he hadn't told her. Of course he hadn't. "She is delusional," my father stammered, backing away. "She is hallucinating. Mr. Thorne was here," I said, driving the final nail into the coffin. "He was here an hour ago. He showed me the logs of your attempts to file for conservatorship while I was in a coma." "Thorne?" My father whispered the name like a curse. "I signed the papers, Dad," I said, leaning back into my pillows. Feeling a wave of exhaustion hit me, but it was the exhaustion of victory. "I accepted the trust. I am the sole beneficiary, and I am competent." You can't," my father choked out. "That money we need, that money. The mortgage on the summer house, the boat payments." "Not my problem," I said. "Now get out of my room before I call the nurse and have you arrested for trespassing. I am a rich woman now. Dad, I can afford very good lawyers." "You little bitch," my mother hissed. Lunging forward, her mask completely gone now, revealing the predator beneath, Silas stepped in. He didn't shout this time. He just moved. He grabbed my father by the shoulder and my mother by the arm. He was an 80-year-old mechanic who had moved engine blocks with his bare hands. They didn't stand a chance. "The lady asked you to leave," Silas said, his voice low and dangerous. "And if you ever come back here, I will tell the press exactly why you didn't answer the phone." He shoved them into the hallway. Julian scrambled after them, looking terrified. His phone clutched to his chest like a shield. Silas slammed the door and locked it again. He turned to me. He was breathing hard, but there was a grin splitting his face amidst the gray stubble. "That," Silas said, "was better than the graduation speech." I looked at the door. I knew this wasn't over. They were desperate animals now, cornered and wounded. They would bite. They would claw. But for the first time in 23 years, I wasn't the one bleeding. "Grandpa," I said, closing my eyes. "Call Mr. Thorne. Tell him the war just started." The silence that followed their departure was not peaceful. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a battlefield after the artillery has stopped, leaving only the ringing in your ears and the smell of smoke. My parents and Julian did not leave the hospital grounds immediately. Like vultures that had been shooed away from a carcass, they hovered, circling the perimeter, waiting for an opportunity to swoop back in. I could hear them in the hallway for 20 minutes after Silas had locked the door. I heard my mother's voice, no longer screeching but wheedling, trying to charm the nurses. I heard my father's blustering tone, demanding to speak to the hospital administrator about patient rights, by which he meant his right to control me. But I had drawn a line in the sand with the ink of a torn statement, and I was not going to step back. When they finally realized that the door was not going to open, their tactics shifted, the aggression evaporated, replaced by a desperate, frantic solicitation that was far more terrifying. My phone, which I had unblocked only to send the evidence to my lawyer, began to light up again. "Daddy, Dahlia, please, we are a family. We can work this out. Don't let a misunderstanding destroy us. Mom, I bought you some pajamas, silk ones. I am just downstairs. Please let me in. I just want to brush your hair." Julian, "Seriously. Sis, the investors are watching. Just one tweet. That is all I need. One tweet saying we are cool. I will give you 10%. Please." I read these messages with a detached, clinical curiosity. They were not the pleas of parents who missed their child. They were the negotiations of business partners who were staring at a bankruptcy filing. There was a frantic energy to their begging, a specific frequency of panic that I recognized from my time studying criminal law. It was the panic of a perpetrator who realizes the alibi has crumbled. "They are scared," I said to Silas, placing the phone face down on the sheets. But not for me. Silas was sitting by the window, peering through the blinds at the parking lot below. The streetlights cast long, jail bar shadows across his face. "No," he agreed, his voice grave. "They are terrified, and Robert only gets terrified when his wallet is threatened. But this feels different, Dahlia. This is not just about Julian's app failing. They have lost money before. This feels like they are afraid of prison." He turned to me, and his expression was serious. "We need to talk about Arthur Thorne," he said. "The lawyer?" I asked. He seemed capable. He stood up to Dad. "He is more than just a lawyer," Silas explained, sitting on the edge of the bed. "He was your grandmother's confidant. When Eleanor started getting sick, she didn't trust Robert. She knew he was waiting for her to die so he could sell off the machine shop and the land. So she found Thorne. She met him in secret, at diners and park benches, paying him in cash so there would be no paper trail. She was building something. Dahlia, a fortress, and she gave the keys to Thorne. Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I didn't know the details," Silas admitted, looking down at his rough hands. "She kept me out of it to protect me. She knew I couldn't lie to Robert if he pressed me. But Thorne has been watching you. He has been waiting. And if Robert is this scared of him, it means Thorne is holding a weapon." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11 at night. The hospital was settling into its nocturnal rhythm. "Where are they?" I asked. "The Ritz-Carlton," Silas scoffed. They checked in an hour ago. They said the hospital chairs were bad for your mother's back. They are not coming back until morning. Of course, they wouldn't sleep on a plastic chair for me. They would strategize over room service. Call Mr. Thorne, I said. Tell him the coast is clear. I want to know everything, Mr. Thorne arrived 40 minutes later. He did not look like a man who had been woken up. He looked as crisp and sharp as he had in the afternoon. Wearing a fresh navy suit and carrying a heavy leather briefcase, he entered the room like a shadow, checking the hallway before closing the door softly. Ms. Lockhart, he nodded to me, then to Silas. It is good to see you awake and lucid. We have much to discuss, and discretion is paramount. He pulled a chair close to my bed, opened his briefcase, and removed a thick file bound in red string. He handled it with reverence, as if it were a holy text. What I am about to tell you falls under attorney-client privilege, Thorne began, his voice low and precise. But given the events of the last week, I believe we have moved beyond simple estate law into the realm of criminal negligence. We need to establish the facts. He untied the string and spread a series of documents across my blanket. They were old papers, yellowed at the edges, mixed with fresh, crisp spreadsheets. Your grandmother, Eleanor Lockhart, was a woman of extraordinary foresight, Thorne said. 30 years ago, she inherited a parcel of land in the outer districts. At the time, it was swampland, worthless. Your father, Robert, urged her to sell it for pennies just to buy a new car. She refused. Silas nodded, a small smile touching his lips. I remember that fight. Robert threw a vase. Indeed, Thorne continued. Eleanor held on to that land. 10 years ago, the city announced the expansion of the metro line. That swampland became prime commercial real estate. Eleanor sold it to a development consortium. She sold it? I frowned. But we never saw any money. We lived comfortably. Sure, but not wealthy. She sold it quietly, Thorne said, his eyes gleaming behind his spectacles. She sold it through a shell company I set up for her. The net proceeds were $4.2 million. I gasped. The monitor next to me beeped faster. $4 million. That was a life-changing amount of money. That was freedom. Where is it? I whispered. It is in the Lockhart Education and Enterprise Trust. Thorne tapped a document titled with those exact words. Eleanor knew your father. She knew that if he got his hands on that money, he would gamble it away on bad investments and flashy cars within a decade. She wanted to skip a generation. She wanted to secure the future of the one person in this family she believed had a moral compass. He looked at me. You? I felt tears prick my eyes. Grandma Eleanor. I had only vague memories of her. A soft lap, the smell of lavender, a stern voice telling my father to sit down. She had been watching out for me from the grave. But there were conditions, Thorne said, his tone turning serious. Eleanor wanted to ensure you were ready. She did not want to give a fortune to a reckless teenager. The trust stipulates that the beneficiary must reach the age of 23, and to prove discipline, the beneficiary must graduate from an accredited university with high honors, or better. I am 23, I said, and I was the valedictorian. Exactly, Thorne said. You met the criteria on the day of your graduation. The trust matured the moment you walked onto that stage. The money is yours. Dahlia, all of it, the principal and the accrued interest. It is nearly $5 million now. $5 million. It was an abstract number. It was too big to comprehend. But then, the lawyer flipped a page, revealing a clause highlighted in yellow. However, Thorne said, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop again. There is a contingency clause. Eleanor was thorough, but she had to account for every possibility. Clause 14b, regarding beneficiary incapacity. He turned the document so I could read it. The legal jargon was dense, but my law training allowed me to parse it instantly. In the event that the primary beneficiary is deceased prior to the maturation date, or is declared medically or legally incapacitated with no reasonable expectation of recovery, The control of the trust assets shall revert to the natural guardian of the beneficiary. Mr. Robert Lockhart. I read it twice, then a third time. The words swam before my eyes, rearranging themselves into a horrific picture. If I die, I whispered. Dad gets the money. Yes, Thorne said. If I am a vegetable, I continued, my voice shaking. Dad gets the money. Yes. And if I am mentally incompetent due to brain damage, I finished, looking up at him. Dad controls the money. Precisely, Thorne said. Now, let us construct the timeline of the last 5 days. He pulled out a notebook. On the 19th, your birthday. The trust matured. However, the bank requires your physical signature and proof of graduation to release the funds. Your father knows this. He has known about the trust for years. Though he did not know the exact amount, he has been counting down the days. On the 21st, Thorne continued, you collapsed. You suffered a catastrophic AVM rupture. You were rushed to this hospital. The doctors contacted your parents immediately. I closed my eyes, remembering the nurse's story, the missed calls, the busy signals. They didn't answer, I said. They answered eventually, Silas interrupted, his voice a low growl. And Robert told me to give you sugar water. He said you were fainting. Let us look at it through the lens of Clause 14b, Thorne said, his voice devoid of emotion, like a surgeon cutting out a tumor. If you recover, you get the $5 million, Robert gets nothing. But if you die on that table, or if the surgery is delayed long enough that you suffer permanent cognitive brain damage and are declared incapacitated. He let the sentence hang in the air. I felt like I was going to vomit. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with the force of a physical blow, the delay. It wasn't just selfishness. It wasn't just that they were having fun on a yacht and didn't want to be disturbed. They were stalling. Every time my father sent a call to voicemail, he was buying time for the hemorrhage to do its work. Every minute he refused to give consent for the surgery. The pressure in my skull increased, destroying more neurons, eating away at the person I was. He didn't need to kill me with a gun. He just needed to let nature kill me, or at least break me enough that I could never sign those bank documents. He wanted me brain dead, I whispered. The horror of it was so absolute, it was almost numbing. My own father. He wanted me to be a vegetable so he could buy a boat. He was gambling, Thorne said. He knew that if he came back immediately and authorized the surgery, you would likely make a full recovery. That is the worst-case scenario for his bank account. But if he waited, if he claimed he was in transit or could not be reached, and you happened to pass away or suffer severe damage, well, that is a tragedy, isn't it? A $5 million tragedy. I looked at Silas. He was weeping. Silent tears streamed down his rugged cheeks into his beard. He looked broken. I didn't know, Silas sobbed. I thought he was just a fool. I didn't know he was a monster. It gets worse, Thorne said. He pulled out a printout of an email. This was sent from your father's email account to my firm 2 days ago, while you were in the deepest part of your coma. I took the paper. Subject: Emergency Conservatorship. Dahlia Lockhart, 2. Thorne Associates. Dear Arthur, it is with a heavy heart that I must inform you my daughter has suffered massive brain trauma. The doctors are not optimistic about her cognitive recovery, as her natural father. I need to initiate the process of assuming control of her financial affairs to ensure her medical care is paid for. Please prepare the transfer documents for the trust immediately. We need to access the funds to pay for a private facility. He was trying to cash me out before I was even cold, I said, crumpling the paper in my fist. He assumed you would not wake up, Thorne said, or that if you did, you would be unable to speak or understand what was happening. He came to the hospital today with those flowers and that camera crew to establish the narrative of the doting father if he plays the grieving parent. No judge would question his request for conservatorship. The anger that had been burning in me since I woke up changed. It cooled, condensed, and solidified into something hard and sharp. It was no longer emotional. It was tactical. They had tried to murder me. Passive murder, perhaps, but murder nonetheless. They had looked at my life and weighed it against a stack of cash, and they had chosen the cash. They are not family, I said. My voice was steady. They are defendants. I looked at Mr. Thorne. What do I need to do? Thorne smiled, and for the first time, it was a genuine smile. First, we secure the money. I have the papers here. You sign them, and the trust is yours. Robert cannot touch a cent. Second, we secure your safety. I have already hired private security. They are stationed in the lobby. Your parents will not get within 100 feet of this room again. And third? I asked. Third, Thorne said, closing his briefcase with a satisfying click. We destroy them. You mentioned Julian's company? The fraud? The fake investors? Yes, I said. And I assume, given your father's desperate need for this trust money, that his own finances are fragile? He leveraged the house to pay for the yacht rental. Silas piped up. I saw the bank letters at the house. He is underwater. Excellent, Thorne said. Then we have leverage. Dahlia, you have the evidence. You have the recordings of them refusing to come home. You have the medical logs of the delayed consent. You have this email attempting to steal your money while you were in a coma. We can sue them, I said. We can do more than sue them, Thorne corrected. We can dismantle them. We can expose the fraud to the SEC. We can leak the timeline to the press. We can ensure that by the time we are done, the name Lockhart is synonymous with nothing but shame. He handed me the gold pen he had used earlier. Sign here, Dahlia, and let us begin the end of their world. I took the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name in clear, bold letters. Dahlia Lockhart. It felt like signing a death warrant, but not for me. I handed the paper back to Thorne. Do it, I said. Take everything, as Thorne packed up his papers to leave into the night. I looked at Silas. He reached out and took my hand. I am sorry, he whispered. I am sorry I raised a son who could do this. You didn't raise him alone, I said, squeezing his hand. And you are here now. That is all that matters. I lay back against the pillows, listening to the hum of the hospital. Outside, in a luxury hotel suite, my parents were sleeping on thread-count sheets, dreaming of the millions they thought they were about to inherit. They were dreaming of a life where I was a quiet, broken thing in a wheelchair, a tragic prop that paid for their champagne. They had no idea that the girl they left to die had just bought the shovel to dig their graves. The morning sun sliced through the hospital blinds like a razor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the sterile air. It was 9 a.m, the time when rounds began, when trays of lukewarm eggs were delivered, and when desperation wore a suit and tie. They came back exactly as I knew they would. My parents and Julian entered the room with a renewed energy that felt frantic and brittle. Gone were the tears of the previous day. Gone was the aggression. In their place was a terrifying, manic efficiency. My father, Robert, was wearing a fresh shirt, though I noticed a coffee stain on the cuff. My mother, Cynthia, had reapplied her makeup, covering the cracks in her composure with a thick layer of foundation. Julian trailed behind them, his eyes darting around the room as if he expected the walls to close in on him. They did not bring flowers this time. They brought a stack of documents. Good morning, sweetie, my mother cooed. Her voice pitched an octave too high. She placed a Starbucks cup on the bedside table, a peace offering bought with spare change. How are we feeling today? The doctors say your vitals are looking much better. I am alive, I said, keeping my face impassive. I was sitting up in bed, the pillows propped behind me. Grandpa Silas was in his usual spot by the window, whittling a piece of wood with a pocket knife. He didn't look up when they entered, but his shoulders tensed. That is wonderful, my father said, rubbing his hands together. He looked sweaty. There was a sheen of perspiration on his upper lip, despite the air conditioning being set to a chilly 68 degrees. Look, Dahlia, we know yesterday was emotional. We were all stressed. We said things we didn't mean. We just want to make sure you are taken care of, Julian added. Stepping forward, he looked terrible. His tan was fading into a sickly yellow, and his hands were shaking slightly as he shoved them into his pockets. Really, we want to fix this. So, my father continued, pulling a thick sheaf of papers from a folder, we need to get some administrative things out of the way. Boring stuff, really, but necessary. He placed the documents on the tray table and swiveled it over my lap. The top page was titled in bold, innocuous letters, Medical Liability, Waiver and Asset Management Authorization. What is this? I asked, picking up the pen he had conveniently placed on top of the paper. It is for the insurance, my mother said quickly, too quickly. You know how these hospitals are. They won't process the billing for the surgery unless we have a guaranteed payment structure on file. Since your insurance lapsed, we are stepping in to cover it personally, but we need your authorization to link our accounts to your medical file. It is just a formality, my father insisted, tapping the signature line at the bottom of the page. Just sign there, and we can move you to the VIP suite upstairs. Better food, private nurses, the works. I looked down at the document. It was a masterpiece of legal camouflage. The first paragraph indeed talked about medical bills. But my eyes, trained by 4 years of grueling law school and nights spent squinting at fine print in the library, drifted to the third paragraph. The signee hereby grants full power of attorney over all current and future financial assets, trusts, and estates to Robert and Cynthia Lockhart for a period of not less than 5 years. To ensure liquidity for medical debts, they weren't asking for permission to pay my bills. They were asking for the keys to the kingdom. They needed my signature now. They needed it before Mr. Thorne filed the official paperwork announcing that I had claimed the trust. They assumed I was still ignorant, still the confused girl who had just woken up from a coma. They thought they could sneak this past me in the fog of recovery. Why the rush? I asked, looking up at Julian. Can't this wait until I'm discharged? No, Julian shouted. He flinched at the volume of his own voice and lowered it instantly. I mean, no, it can't wait. The hospital is threatening to stop treatment. They might discharge you early if we don't secure the funding by noon. We are doing this for you. Dahlia. I looked at him, really looked at him, beneath the designer clothes and the layers of bravado. I saw a terrified little boy. You look scared, Julian, I said softly. I am worried about my sister. He lied, but I knew the truth. Mr. Thorne had done more than just prepare trust documents the night before. He had run a background check on Julian's startup. The truth was not just a failed business. It was a crime scene. Julian hadn't just lost money. He had stolen it. He had solicited $500,000 from a group of angel investors in Chicago 6 months ago, funds meant for app development. Instead of hiring coders, he had spent it on the penthouse, the sports car, and the down payment for the yacht rental. The investors had found out. They had given him a deadline. Repay the principal amount of $500,000 by this Friday, or they would go to the district attorney with evidence of wire fraud and embezzlement. Today was Thursday. Julian wasn't here to save me. He was here because I was his piggy bank. He needed to drain my grandmother's trust fund to keep himself out of a federal prison cell. $500,000, I said, testing the water. The room went dead silent. What? My father asked, his voice cracking. That is a lot of money for a brain surgery, I said, watching their reactions. Is that what the bill is? It is complicated, my mother stammered, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. Specialists are expensive. Just sign the paper. Dahlia, please. We are running out of time. Running out of time, I repeated. Yes, I suppose you are. I gripped the pen. I lowered the tip to the paper. I heard 3 people inhale sharply at the same time. My father leaned in, his eyes wide and hungry, focused on the tip of the pen like a starving dog watching a piece of meat. My mother bit her lip. Julian actually took a step closer, his hand reaching out as if to snatch the paper the moment the ink touched the fiber. They were salivating. They were already spending the money in their heads. They were paying off the mob, buying the silence of the investors, perhaps even planning their next vacation to recover from the stress of my hospitalization. I let the pen hover over the signature line. I watched the greed illuminate their faces, stripping away the mask of family to reveal the parasites underneath. Then, I stopped. I looked up, locking eyes with my father. "Dad," I said, my voice calm and conversational. "Do you know the title of my graduation thesis?" My father blinked, confused by the sudden change of topic. "What? Dahlia, who cares? Just sign the damn paper." "It is a simple question," I said, keeping the pen frozen in the air. "I worked on it for 8 months. I sent you the draft. I asked you to proofread it. You said you were too busy with Julian's launch. Do you remember the title?" "I don't know," he snapped, his patience fraying. "Something about economics? How to make money? Look, we can discuss your schoolwork later. Sign." "No," I said. "We will discuss it now." I sat up straighter, the pain in my head forgotten, replaced by the cold clarity of execution. My thesis was titled, "Forms of Trust, Fraud, and Criminal Liability in Family Relationships, a Case Study on Fiduciary Breach." My father froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. My mother went still as a statue. "I studied the exact laws you are trying to break right now," I continued, my voice hardening into steel. "I wrote 100 pages on how parents use undue influence to coerce incapacitated children into signing over assets. I cited the exact statutes regarding embezzlement, wire fraud, and the misuse of power of attorney." I looked at Julian. "And I wrote a whole chapter on Ponzi schemes disguised as startups." Julian's face turned the color of old milk. He backed away, hitting the wall. "She knows," he whispered. "Mom, she knows." "I know about the Chicago investors." "Julian," I said, enjoying the look of absolute terror in his eyes. "I know about the deadline. I know that if you don't wire them $500,000 by tomorrow, you are trading your penthouse for a cell block." "Dahlia, listen," my father started, raising his hands in a placating gesture, panic bleeding into his voice. "It is not what you think. We can explain. We just need to borrow." "Borrow?" I laughed. A harsh sound. "You were going to steal it. You were going to steal the money Grandma left me because you are too weak to face the consequences of your own greed." I looked down at the document on my lap, the paper that would have enslaved me to them for 5 years. "You want my signature?" I asked. I took the paper in both hands. With a slow, deliberate motion, I tore it down the middle. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "No!" my mother shrieked, lunging forward. I tore it again, and again. I shredded their lifeline into confetti. "There is your signature," I said, throwing the pieces onto the floor. "You stupid little bitch!" My father roared, his facade completely shattering. The veins in his neck bulged. He lunged at the bed, his hand raised to strike me. "You are going to ruin us. You are going to let your brother go to jail?" Silas was out of his chair in a blur, but he didn't need to intervene. I reached under my pillow and pulled out my phone. I pressed play. A voice filled the room. It was tinny, coming from the phone speakers, but crystal clear. "You sign that paper, and we pay the bill. You refuse? We walk out that door, and you are left with a debt that will bury you. We will cut the payments." It was my mother's voice from yesterday. Then my father's voice. "We need that money. The mortgage on the summer house, the boat payments." And then, the piece de resistance, the email. Mr. Thorne had given me, which I had read aloud and recorded myself reading earlier that morning. Subject: Emergency Conservatorship to Thorne Associates. As her natural father, I need to initiate the process of assuming control. The doctors are not optimistic about her cognitive recovery. The recording ended. My parents stood frozen. They looked like ghosts. They realized, finally, that they were not the hunters. They were the prey. Extortion, I said, citing the law. Attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit theft. And Julian? Wire fraud is a federal offense. That is 20 years. Minimum. Dahlia, please, my mother sobbed, falling to her knees amidst the torn paper. We are your family. You can't do this. We will lose everything. You lost everything the moment you left me on that floor, I said. There was a knock on the door, firm, authoritative, 3 sharp raps. Come in, I called out. The door opened. Mr. Thorne stepped in, looking impeccable, but he was not alone. Behind him were 2 officers in uniforms that I recognized immediately, not hospital security, not local cops. These were officers from the Economic Crimes Unit. Mr. Robert Lockhart? Mr. Julian Lockhart? One of the officers asked, stepping into the room. No, Julian whimpered. He tried to bolt. He actually tried to run past Silas towards the window, as if he could jump from the 4th floor. Silas caught him by the collar of his designer jacket and threw him back into the center of the room. Sit down, boy. We have a warrant for the arrest of Julian Lockhart on charges of grand larceny and securities fraud, the officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs, and we would like to bring Mr. Robert Lockhart in for questioning regarding conspiracy and falsifying medical documents. This is a mistake, my father shouted as the officer grabbed his arm. My daughter, she is confused. She had brain surgery. You can't trust her. I trust the paper trail, sir, the officer said, spinning him around. Dahlia, my mother screamed, crawling towards the bed, grabbing my hand. Her grip was wet and clammy. Tell them to stop. He is your father. He is your brother. Don't let them take them away. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had demanded I flat iron my hair before my surgery, the woman who had cared more about a photo op than my pulse. I slowly peeled her fingers off my hand, one by one. I have no family, I said to her. I have a grandfather, and I have a trust fund. You are just people I used to know. Get them out of here. Mr. Thorne said to the officers. The scene that followed was ugly. Julian was crying, snot running down his face, begging for his dad to fix it. My father was shouting legal threats that made no sense. My mother was wailing on the floor until a female officer had to help her up and escort her out. They were dragged out of the room, their cries echoing down the hospital corridor, a cacophony of shame that drew nurses and patients to their doors. When the door finally closed, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't heavy, it wasn't pressurized, it was clean. I looked at the pile of torn paper on the floor, the insurance documents. Mr. Thorne walked over and picked up a single shred. He looked at me, a rare look of impressed respect in his eyes. That, Thorne said, was the most effective cross-examination I have ever witnessed, and you did it in pajamas. I had a good teacher, I said, looking at Silas. Silas wasn't smiling. He was looking at the empty space where his son and grandson had just been standing. He looked tired. It is a terrible thing to win a war against your own blood. You win, but you still lose. Are you okay, Grandpa? I asked. He sighed, a long, rattling breath, and sat down on the edge of my bed. He patted my hand. I am fine, kid, he said. Just taking out the trash. Sometimes it is heavy. He looked at me, and his eyes cleared. You are free, Dahlia, he said. They can't hurt you anymore. They can't spend your money. They can't steal your voice. It is all over. Not yet, I said, leaning back and feeling the first true wave of relief wash over me. I still have one thing left to do. I have to graduate. You already graduated, Thorne pointed out. You are the valedictorian. No, I said, shaking my head. I collapsed before I finished my speech. I didn't get to say the end. I looked out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Julian was being processed. Somewhere. My parents were calling lawyers who wouldn't take their calls because their checks would bounce. I am going to finish it, I whispered. And this time, everyone is going to listen. But before that, I had a check to write. Mr. Thorne, I said, how quickly can we liquidate enough of the trust to buy a building? What building? Thorne asked. Grandpa's old machine shop, I said, squeezing Silas's hand. The one Dad sold. I want it back, and I want to turn it into a house. A house with thick walls and a strong lock. A house where no one gets left behind. Silas looked at me, and for the first time in days, he smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. It is a wreck, Dahlia, he said. Grease on the floor, roof leaks. Perfect, I said. We will fix it. We are good at fixing broken things. The chaotic symphony of my family's destruction began with the click of handcuffs. It was a cold, mechanical sound that cut through the humid air of the hospital room, silencing the hysteria that had been building since my parents walked in. The officer from the Economic Crimes Unit did not hesitate. He spun Julian around, pulling his arms behind his back with a practiced efficiency that made my brother yelp in pain. Julian Lockhart, the officer recited, his voice bored and heavy with authority. You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Julian did not remain silent. He wailed. It was a high, thin sound, like a kettle boiling over, stripping away every layer of the confident entrepreneur persona he had cultivated for years. Mom! Dad! Do something! Julian screamed, struggling against the cuffs. Tell them it is a mistake. I am a CEO. My parents, who had been huddled near the door, exploded into motion. But they did not rush to comfort him. They turned on me. You did this! My mother shrieked. Her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. She pointed a manicured finger at me, shaking with rage. You ungrateful, spiteful little snake! You set him up. You planted those files. She is mentally unstable, my father roared, stepping toward the police officers, his face a blotchy crimson. Officer, listen to me. My daughter has brain damage. She does not know what she is saying. This is a family dispute. We can settle this financially. There is no need for arrests. The evidence was submitted to the district attorney 3 hours ago, sir, the officer replied, not even looking at my father. We have the bank transfers. We have the fake investor emails. We have the testimony of the victims in Chicago. This is not a dispute. It is a felony. My father looked at Julian, then at the officers, and finally, his gaze landed on me. I was sitting calmly in the bed, watching the inevitable collapse of the house of cards they had built on my back. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I met his eyes with a cold, absolute indifference. That indifference broke him. He realized in that second that he had lost. He realized the money was gone, the reputation was ash, and the daughter he had treated as a servant had become his executioner. He snapped. You bitch! He screamed. He lunged. It happened so fast that the police officers, who were focused on securing Julian, were caught off guard. My father crossed the distance between the door and my bed in 2 strides, his hand raised, his fingers curled into a fist intended to smash into my healing skull. I saw the violence in his eyes. I saw the intent to hurt, to silence, to destroy the evidence by destroying the witness. I braced myself, flinching back against the pillows, but the blow never landed. A gray blur intercepted him, Grandpa Silas, the man who walked with a cane, the man they called old and useless, moved with the explosive power of the soldier he had been 50 years ago. He stepped into my father's path, dipped his shoulder, and drove his weight into his son's midsection. It was a perfect tackle. My father's breath left him in a wet, audible whoosh. His feet left the floor. Silas drove him backward, slamming him onto the linoleum with a bone-shaking thud that rattled the medical equipment. Silas pinned him there, his knee pressed into my father's chest, his forearm against his throat. You will not touch my granddaughter, Silas growled, his voice low and terrifyingly steady. You will not look at her. You will not breathe the same air as her. Not ever again. My father gasped, clawing at Silas's arm, his face turning purple. But the old man did not budge. He held him there until the police officers rushed over, pulling Silas off and hauling my father to his feet. "Get off me!" my father sputtered, coughing. "That old man assaulted me. Arrest him." "Sit down and shut up," the officer said, shoving my father into a chair. "Or you will be joining your son in the back of the cruiser for assault and battery." The room fell into a heavy, vibrating silence. Julian was sobbing quietly in the corner. My mother was hyperventilating, clutching her chest. My father was slumped in the chair. Defeated, Mr. Thorne, who had watched the entire scene with the dispassionate gaze of a man who billed by the hour, stepped forward. He walked to the foot of my bed, opening his briefcase on the tray table. "Now that we have everyone's attention," Mr. Thorne said, his voice cutting through the noise, "Ms. Lockhart has a statement to make regarding the disposition of the Lockhart Education and Enterprise Trust." He looked at me. I sat up straight. My head throbbed, a dull ache behind the bandages, but my mind was crystal clear. "I formally accept the trust," I said, my voice ringing out in the room. "I am the sole beneficiary. The funds are to be transferred to my personal control effective immediately." My mother looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. "Dahlia, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We have legal fees. The bail money set it at $100,000 for Julian. We don't have that kind of cash liquid. We need a loan, just a loan. We will pay you back." "No," I said. "What?" she gasped. "No bail," I said. "No legal fees, no mortgage payments, no car payments." I looked at Julian, who was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. "You wanted to be a big shot, Julian," I said. "You wanted the yacht and the lifestyle. Well, now you get the consequences. You are going to go to jail. And you are going to stay there until your trial because I am not spending one single dime of Grandma's money to save you from your own crimes." "You can't do that," my father yelled, straining against the officer's grip. "We are your parents. You owe us." "I owe you nothing," I said. "You tried to steal my future to pay for his mistakes. You left me to die on a floor. The ledger is balanced. We are done." I turned to the lead officer. "Officer, I would like to file a restraining order," I said, "against Robert, Cynthia, and Julian Lockhart. I want them removed from this hospital immediately, and I want them barred from coming within 500 feet of me or my grandfather." "Consider it done," the officer said. "Given the assault I just witnessed, the judge will sign it within the hour." "Get them out," I said. "I am tired." The police hauled Julian up. He was dead weight, his legs dragging on the floor. My parents followed, flanked by officers. As they were led out into the hallway, the nurses and doctors who had gathered to watch the commotion parted like the Red Sea. They walked the walk of shame, their heads bowed, not in contrition, but in the crushing realization that their social standing had evaporated. I listened to their footsteps fade down the corridor. I listened until the elevator dinged and the doors slid shut, sealing them out of my life. For the first time in 23 years, the air around me felt clean. The next week passed in a blur of vindication. From the sanctuary of my private hospital room, now upgraded and paid for by my own money, I watched the fallout on the news. It was brutal and absolute. Julian was denied bail due to being a flight risk. The press had a field day with the story of the yacht party fraudster. His face was plastered on every local news station, usually juxtaposed with the photo of me lying on the stage. The contrast between the villain and the victim was too perfect for the media to resist. My parents fared no better, with their assets frozen by the investigation and their reputation in tatters. The creditors descended like locusts. Mr. Thorne informed me that the bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings on their house. The luxury cars were repossessed. The country club revoked their membership. They were not just broke, they were pariahs. 7 days after the surgery, I was discharged. I sat in a wheelchair by the hospital entrance, waiting for the valet. The automatic doors slid open, and the warm summer air hit my face. It smelled of exhaust fumes and city dust, but to me, it smelled like perfume. "Ready to go home, kid?" Silas asked. He was standing behind me, gripping the handles of the wheelchair. "We don't have a home, Grandpa," I said. "My apartment is gone. Your house as well. It is crowded." "We have a project," Silas corrected. A black town car pulled up. "Mr. Thorne stepped out, holding a set of keys. "The paperwork went through this morning," Thorne said, handing the keys to me. "The deed is in your name, free and clear." We drove to the industrial district on the edge of town. We pulled up in front of a dilapidated brick building with shattered windows and a caved-in roof. Weeds were growing through the cracks in the concrete driveway. A faded sign hung crookedly above the bay doors. Lockhart Mechanics. It was the shop my grandfather had built with his own hands. The shop my father had sold behind his back 20 years ago to pay off a gambling debt. It was a ruin, but it was ours. "It needs work," Silas said, looking at the building with misty eyes. "We have $5 million, Grandpa," I said, gripping the keys. "We can buy a lot of work." I spent the next 6 months rebuilding not just my body, but my heritage. I hired the best contractors in the city. We didn't tear the shop down. We reinforced it. We kept the brick walls, sandblasting them until they glowed a warm red. We replaced the roof with steel beams and skylights that flooded the space with sun. We turned the workshop floor into a massive living room. Keeping the old hydraulic lifts as industrial art pieces, we built a loft for my bedroom and a suite on the ground floor for Silas. We installed a security system that could rival Fort Knox. It became a fortress, a sanctuary. 6 months after the collapse, on a crisp autumn morning, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my new bedroom. I was wearing a sharp navy blue suit, tailored, expensive, and powerful. My hair had grown back, thick and glossy, completely covering the long, thin scar that ran up the side of my head. I reached up and touched the spot where the metal clip now held my brain together. It was a part of me now, a reminder that I had broken and put myself back together stronger. My phone pinged on the vanity table. I picked it up. It was an email. From Managing Partner, Sterling Vance, LLP. Subject, Formal Offer of Employment. Dear Ms. Lockhart, we have reviewed your application and your academic record. Your thesis on fiduciary fraud was particularly impressive. We would be honored to have you join our firm as a junior associate. We understand you previously interned at Vanguard Horizon, but we are confident we can offer a more supportive environment. Sterling Vance was the direct competitor to Vanguard Horizon. They were bigger, fiercer, and they specialized in corporate litigation. I smiled. It wasn't the shy, apologetic smile of the girl who used to serve coffee. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized she was at the top of the food chain. I accepted the offer. Then, I opened my messages one last time. I had kept one number unblocked, just for this moment. I opened a new message thread addressed to my father, my mother, and my brother. I attached a photo. It was a picture of my diploma, framed in heavy mahogany, hanging on the brick wall of the reclaimed shop. Next to it was a copy of the deed to the building, with my name highlighted. I typed a single sentence. The price of your absence is that you will never see me again. I hit send. Then, I went into the settings and pressed block all contacts. I put the phone in my pocket. I walked downstairs, the heels of my shoes clicking rhythmically on the polished concrete floor. Silas was waiting for me by the door, holding a mug of coffee. "You look sharp," he said. "Ready to go take over the world?" "Not the world, Grandpa," I said, taking the coffee. "Just my part of it." We walked out into the sunlight, leaving the ghosts of the past locked outside the heavy steel doors. They had gambled my life for a vacation and a fortune. In the end, they lost the money, they lost their freedom, and they lost their daughter. And me? I lost 3 people who had never really been family. It was a bargain. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you felt every moment of Dahlia's journey from betrayal to triumph. If this story moved you, please take a moment to scroll down and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from today. I love reading your thoughts and knowing where our community is growing around the world. Please don't forget to subscribe to the BitterSweet Drama Stories channel. Hit that like button to support the video, and press the hype button if you want to see more stories like this one reach a wider audience. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.